And thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. I apologize for being a few minutes late to my colleagues on the Democratic side. The Republican Rules Committee wanted to meet for a few minutes and make sure we were prepared, and we're trying our very best today to respond not only to the bill that is before us today, but also the President of the United States, President Obama, a few hours ago, had a press conference where he made an announcement that we are still trying to make sure that we understand and learn, and to have a opportunity to not only work with the President, but more importantly, to work on behalf of the American people. And the legislation that we are considering today, H.R. 3350, the Keep Your Health Plan Act of 2013, is very appropriate. The successful rain dance has a lot to do with timing, and it seems like America is speaking about the problem that has become more and more apparent to the American people, and that is that, in fact, despite what they had been told over and over and over and over, that if you like your health care plan, you can keep it, that there are millions of people across the country who are receiving notices in the mail that their individual health care plans are being canceled. The last 10 days or so, members of Congress have been back home, have been holding town hall meetings, have been going to Rotary clubs, have been attending events that the American people are now worried and distraught over losing their health care as a result of the Democratic plan and the President signing the Affordable Health Care Plan, that they are ordered by the federal government to drop people that do not comply with the plan that the government wants them to have. So as a result of that, more than 3.5 million people have received cancellation notices from their insurance providers due to mandates that were prescribed in the Affordable Health Care Act. The President's health care law was sold by the administration as an avenue to help Americans to have health care and get health care coverage. However, the law is having what I believe is the opposite effect, and it's actually shifting more people to the roles of the uninsured. It's causing chaos, and it is causing people to reevaluate their ability to effectively believe in the words and the effects that federal officials, including elected officials, have. I think it's important to note that these cancellation notices are not an unintended consequence. It was known and understood by the law, well understood by Republicans, and in fact, according to NBC News, the administration had known for years that this was going to happen, warned the President of the United States, who ignored that advice. Since Obamacare inception, House Republicans have consistently, perhaps up to 42 times, voted on piece parts of this bill. They've been before the Rules Committee, and each and every time we were told it was a waste of time. In fact, we fought for the opportunity to represent the viewpoints of the bill, which we did understand. Republicans stand for access to quality health care. We believe that a patient should be able to choose their own doctor and choose their own insurance coverage. Recent reports of skyrocketing premiums and the President's apology for misleading the American people prove that the problem with this Affordable Care Act is a problem, not just the implementation, but the actual law. The problem is in the law itself, and that is why Republicans in the House of Representatives have been working so diligently on this effort. We're here today because House Republicans believe that the American people should be able to keep the health care that they have, that they chose, that they pay for, and that they like. We believe that the millions of Americans who are losing their insurance plans as a result of a regulation from Washington, D.C., like many of those in Dallas, Richardson, and Garland, Texas, who I encountered over the break, are distraught and worried. And thus, House Republicans are here as a continuation of the discussion that we are having among ourselves and with the American people that we believe the American people deserve better than the plans that are getting canceled and better than what is provided for in the Affordable Care Act. Today, we have two expert witnesses from the Energy and Commerce Committee. One, the gentleman, Dr. Michael Burgess, yes, of the Rules Committee. And Mike's second favorite chairman, Chairman Fred Upton, has provided Dr. Burgess as a member of the Rules Committee because he understands not only how we operate, but what we're trying to accomplish today. And I would welcome the gentleman to the witness table, please, Dr. Michael Burgess. Secondly, the honorable gentleman from New Jersey, Frank Pallone. Mr. Pallone obviously is a healthcare expert and provided expert testimony on behalf of Obamacare. So I think it's important that not just House Democrats, but the administration know that they have a person who they've counted on to be able to understand and articulate this important decision. And so I would welcome both of you here today. Before I acknowledge and defer to you, I would ask if the gentlewoman from New York, the ranking member, has an opening statement. Gentlewoman is recognized.
No, I just view this as the 48th time that we're going to vote in the House of Representatives to kill health care for American people.
The gentlewoman has been given an opportunity and evidently yields back her time. I want to welcome both Dr. Burgess and Mr. Pallone to the Rules Committee. Without objection, anything you have in writing will be entered into the record. The gentleman from Texas, the gentleman from the Rules Committee, Energy and Commerce Committee, Dr. Burgess, is recognized.
I thank the Chairman for the recognition. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today on behalf of Chairman Upton. The bill that will be under consideration on the floor of the House tomorrow, H.R. 3550, is a bill introduced by Mr. Upton in response to the multiple cries for help we have heard across the country as people have received cancellation notices. The Obama administration's release of the first enrollment numbers in the exchanges yesterday demonstrates one thing very clearly. More people have lost insurance in this country than have selected a plan. 6 weeks into the law's disastrous launch, support is quickly eroding. The problems with healthcare.gov are just the beginning, and even more destructive details are emerging and are going to emerge about the harsh realities that is the Affordable Care Act. Stories of people facing massive increases in their premiums and the millions losing their insurance policies. Of cancer patients, Sessions knows this very well, in North Texas, one of the largest providers of cancer care, has said that they will not be able to function under the Affordable Care Act, so cancer patients are cut off from their specialists, and this is all compounded to undermine the public faith in the law. Millions of Americans have become the collateral damage of the President's talking points. The Associated Press has reported that over 3.5 million people on the individual insurance market have had their plans canceled. The insurers have obeyed the law. They ended the plans that the Obama administration told them that they must, and then they set new rates based on the new complex regulation and mandates within the law. Perhaps if the administration had been as prepared as the insurance executives, they would have been able to tell the American people the truth. Today, Republicans are offering a legislative solution to help Americans get out from under the crushing weight of this law. This law today that we are considering, the rule to consider, H.R. 3550, is a response to a cry for help that each and every one of us have heard in our districts over the last 2 weeks' time. H.R. 3350 provides a lifeline to millions of Americans who have received those cancellation notices from their insurers. While the White House is saying that it will, with its administrative authority, allow illegal health insurance plans to be able to still be sold, the intent of the legislation is to provide a fix that would follow the legal process. The President has refused to work with Congress to change the law. In fact, he specifically said he would not talk to Congress about the law the beginning of last month. The President has refused to allow all health insurance plans to be grandfathered into the eligibility requirements. Let's be clear. The President cannot fix that which is unfixable. The damage has been done. The bell cannot be unrung. The genie cannot be put back in the bottle. Not only have millions of Americans already had their insurance canceled, but many more are being made to pay higher premiums. Many have lost their jobs or seen their work hours curtailed, and they've seen their wages diminish. H.R. 3350 would allow plans available on the individual market today to continue to be offered in 2014. This would provide millions of Americans the opportunity to keep the policies of today into the next calendar year. Even President Obama has publicly admitted that his administration failed in the implementation of what has been described as his signature legislation. Now, here's the sentinel question. Can we really trust the administration to fix the same law in which they created such an unmitigated disaster for the American people? It is our job in Congress to protect the American people. So I urge swift passage of this legislation so Americans have the opportunity to keep the plans that they were promised that they could keep. One other issue that I would add parenthetically, many of the parts of this law that were sold to the American people were sold on the basis of the fact that we had to help people with pre-existing conditions. In states across this country who had provided for their constituents, their citizens who suffered from a pre-existing condition with the establishment of a risk pool, many of those risk pools sunset on December 31st because those legislatures were told that the Affordable Care Act would begin January 1st. I know our state, Chairman, in Texas, is one of those states. We heard about Mr. Pence in Indiana, who said, I'm going to extend that period because I'm not sure that the administration can do what they said they are going to do. I've spoken with our state folks in Austin, and they understand the problem that our citizens in Texas may be up against. I just got an email on the way into this room that Scott Walker in Wisconsin is making similar provisions. The irony is the main reason that this law was sold to the American people is actually damaging those very patients that they purported to want to protect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak today. I'll be happy to answer questions.
Dr. Burgess, thank you very much, and I appreciate your expert testimony this afternoon. Gentleman from New Jersey, gentleman, Mr. Pallone, gentleman from the Energy and Commerce Committee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I do have to express sympathy with Dr. Burgess because he spent most of the day with me in the Health Subcommittee going back and forth on this bill, and now he's had to step down from the rules podium to testify here, so I apologize for your having to be with me most of the day.
I still get to ask you questions.
Okay. But I do want to say that I don't agree with much, if anything, that he said. You know, first of all, I agree with Ms. Slaughter that this is not an effort to fix the Affordable Care Act. It's an effort to repeal it. And if anything, it's an effort to sabotage it, in my opinion, because of what the Upton bill would do. And I continue to hear efforts on the part of the Republicans to what I call demonize the president and, essentially say bad things about him. And, it's just disconcerting to me to have to constantly be back here. I think what we should all be doing is trying to implement the Affordable Care Act because it is the law of the land. But whatever. Look, the Upton bill, the problem with the Upton bill, and the reason I say it sabotages or undermines or repeals Obamacare, is because basically it lets insurance companies, if they want to, and I don't know, I'm not sure that they do, to sell, bad policies at a what oftentimes is not an affordable price. I mean, most of these policies, or many of these policies, are skeletal. They don't provide a good benefit package, and sometimes they're also very expensive. And also, all the discriminatory practices are back again. The effort to eliminate coverage or pricing based on pre-existing conditions, charging women twice as much as men, jacking up premiums, if families get sick. I mean, all those discriminatory practices that we were trying to eliminate would come back with these old policies. Even the idea that you don't have to put your kids on the policy. So what essentially happened is if Upton went into place is people would be buying all skeletal policies at an unaffordable price. And I don't think the insurance company is going to sell them. I mean, one of the main arguments that I say is, Dr. Burgess talks about how the President or the Affordable Care Act are forcing the insurance companies to cancel these policies. I think in many cases they're canceling these policies because they're lousy policies that they can't sell legitimately in the marketplace anymore, because somebody can go on the health exchange once it's working. I admit that it's a problem because it's not working, but once it's working, well, they can go on the health marketplace and buy a policy that provides comprehensive care with good benefits for a lower price, either because of the competition in the market or because they're getting a subsidy with the tax credits. So this whole notion that somehow the Upton bill is going to be a great thing for the consumer is simply not true. And it isn't even true that the insurance companies are being forced to cancel the policies. They could continue to sell the grandfathered policies, but in many cases, they're not selling them because they probably can't compete with what's available now. Now, the other thing is, if for some reason the Upton bill did pass, and obviously I hope it doesn't, and therefore insurance companies did decide to sell these lousy policies, which I don't think they will, but let's say they did. What would be the impact? Well, the impact would probably be that wealthier and healthier people, younger people, would stick with some of these old policies because they're skeletal and catastrophic, and they figure they're not going to get sick, and so maybe they can buy one of them. And then it breaks the insurance pool, because if you don't have in this insurance pool the younger people, the healthier people, then the prices, the premiums are going to go up for everyone else who's left in the insurance pool. And part of the purpose of Obamacare was not only to insure the uninsured and make sure that people with lousy policies had good benefits at an affordable price, okay, but also to make sure that everyone was in the insurance pool as a way of trying to keep down costs for whatever premiums are sold. So again, I don't think that insurance companies would sell these lousy policies even if your bill, if Mr. Upton's bill became law. But God forbid that did happen, premiums would go up, and what the consequence of that would be that the whole purpose of Obamacare, which was essentially to try to provide affordable insurance with a good benefit package, would increasingly be defeated. So that's why this is nothing more than an effort to sabotage what we're trying to accomplish. Now, let me say one more thing, and then I'll stop, Mr. Chairman. If you really wanted to help people who are uninsured or people who can't get insurance right now, the best thing you could all do on the Republican side is go back to those Republican governors in Texas and Florida and other places and ask them to expand Medicaid. Because the biggest problem now is because the court said that they don't have to expand Medicaid, even though they're getting 100% federal funding, that there are going to be people now who would have gotten Medicaid and who won't be able to now because of the decision by Republican governors not to expand it. And I try to make this point at the hearing today that Dr. Burgess and I sat through, and all I got from the Republican side was, well, the expansion of Medicaid is a bad thing, not a good thing. So again, I say, I don't see any real effort on the GOP side to actually fix anything, to do anything that's actually going to be helpful to get people insured or covered or to make sure they have good coverage. The only thing that's going to happen with this Upton bill, if it ever became law, and I don't think it will, would be to basically break the insurance market and make it possible for people to buy lousy policies, for the most part. And I think you're, sadly mistaken if you think it's going to accomplish anything else. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much for your testimony. I'm delighted you and Dr. Burgess have joined us today, and I would like to, if I could, defer my time, which I would normally take at this time, and defer to the gentlewoman who has something she's got to go to, the Vice Chairman of the Committee, the gentlewoman, Dr. Fox. Dr. Fox recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate your letting me speak and ask some questions. There's so much to say and so little time. Mr. Pallone, I really love this country a great deal. And what I love about it and what most people love about it and the people who come here is that we are the freest country in the world, or we have been up until now. And what you're saying, I think your comments condemn this entire situation related to the Affordable Care Act. The arrogance of the left is just breathtaking to me, absolutely breathtaking, that you want to take away the freedom from the American people to choose what they want to buy for their insurance. And it is truly breathtaking to me. It is, the president and the liberals want to decide what is bad and what is good for the American people. That is not the way this country has operated and should operate. It's also ironic to me that you condemn insurance companies, but it appears to all of us that the insurance companies are following the law, and people who are sworn to uphold the law refuse to uphold the law because the law is so bad. The law is just so awful. And what the president is doing and has done, and this will be talked about a little bit later, I think, is damage control to a bill that is not fixable, as Dr. Burgess said. And I appreciate the fact that you have pointed out that this is not an effort to fix the bill. And I do want to ask Dr. Burgess that question. Do you see this legislation as an attempt to fix the bill?
Well, let me just be perfectly straightforward. There is no way you can fix what is unfixable. This product that was delivered on the floor of the Senate, Christmas Eve of 2009, they always intended it for it to go to a conference committee. It never did, and we simply had to pass the rough draft into law on the side of the House of Representatives. This occurred when the Democrats were in the majority. I know very well because I was in this very Rules Committee in March of 2010 trying to talk about some of the things that were destined for calamity in this rough draft that was signed into law. Look, there were multiple hearings held on H.R. 3200 in our committee, the Committee on Ways and Means, Committee on Education and Labor, but H.R. 3200 evaporated into the mists. It's gone into the mists of history. Nobody's seen it for years. This is H.R. 3590. Some House members with a very good memory may recall 3590 from July of 2009. We passed it. It was a pretty big margin on the floor of the House, but it was a veterans housing bill. It was not a health care bill. The bill went over to the Senate to await further activity. The further activity being, Harry Reid called it up, offered an amendment that said strike all after the enacting clause and insert, and what was inserted is what we are left to deal with today. Yes, there was a fix-it bill passed under reconciliation in March of 2010, but in no way was it able to undo the damage that was set in motion by this. No, what we are considering today, please do not misunderstand. This is not an attempt to fix this law. This is an answer to a cry for help. This is a lifeline to our constituents, to our employees in our districts who are saying do something before we are swallowed up into this vortex known as the Affordable Care Act. You cannot fix that which is unfixable. I wish we would have the chance to do that, but today we do not. Today all we are trying to do is to save people from the immediate peril that has been dealt to them by the administration and by the Affordable Care Act.
Thank you, Dr. Burgess. I think it's very important that that be made clear to the American people and to people who worry about whether we are trying to fix this and what it's going to cost them. So I appreciate very much your saying that. I want to say again that this country was founded on the idea of freedom. And what this very bad legislation that was passed in 2010 does is take away freedom from the American people. It is government-centered, not patient-centered. And what Republicans have wanted to do all along is have patient-centered health care. And we do have alternatives to that. And I think the focus has to be on that, not on attempting to fix this very bad legislation. It's tragically flawed. The president has issued waivers for this group, delays for that group, temporary fixes to mask the gravity of this legislation, but it cannot be fixed. I agree with you. And nothing that is being done can undo the damage that has been done there, except, as you say, to throw a lifeline to our folks and help them out. The president's credibility is in shambles, and we know that. The credibility of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle is in shambles, and it's going to stay in shambles, I believe. And we don't know. We know the president today issued a statement about how they're going to offer a fix to some of this, but we don't know whether the president will change his mind tomorrow or next week and make other changes to this. You know, our Constitution has stood us in good stead for over 200 years. We have a legislative body, an executive branch, and a judicial branch. This was a law passed by Democrats. Not a single Republican voted for it. Every Republican that's had an opportunity to repeal it has voted to repeal it. There should be legislative remedies, and where we can make legislative remedies, we will. And we've done that many times. We have voted to repeal it. And I agree with Dr. Burgess. This is not fixable. The only thing that would fix it would be to repeal the entire bill and go with what would be the right thing for the American people. And I thank you, Dr. Burgess, for being here and for the solid work you've done in the last several years on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairwoman yields back her time. Gentlewoman from New York, the ranking member of the committee, Mrs. Slaughter, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you both for being here. And we know absolutely perfectly well where everybody stands because nobody's ever saying anything new. We tried 100 years to get health care. We finally got health care. Over those 100 years, doing all those tries, it was always killed before as well, and I know this is what's happening. But I did want to ask Mrs. Fox before she leaves the room, if I heard her correctly, that you said that the president's reputation was in shambles and that those of us on the other side of the aisle, our credibility was in shambles? Was that your remark? I believe that's what I said. You believe that our credibility is in shambles? Well, I must say I resent your saying that very much. And the one thing the president did today was that the insurance companies who are going to renew these policies have to tell the people who have them what the better policies could provide for them at the same cost. Is that correct? Because we really need to make sure that while we're doing this, if Americans want that, we do not just say Americans get to do everything they want to do and choose. What we say is that our responsibility ends, whereas our neighbors begins. We have seatbelt laws, which have saved numerous lives. We have motorcycle helmet laws. We have laws for clean water, clean air, safe airports, airplanes. So that whole notion that nobody's ever going to tell anybody what to do, but this is not government insurance. I wish it was. If I wanted to have single payer, I'd have liked that a whole lot better because the overhead cost for the government insurance, Medicaid and Medicare, is 2%. The private insurance companies that are going to run this bill is 25 to 28%. We could have saved a heck of a lot more money, I think, provided good care, because I'm not having a lot of people complaining about Medicare where I come from. But anyway, in these policies, the 80% that has to be spent on health care will not be spent on health care. As you pointed out, the prevention for health care will not be there. The pre-existing condition part will not be there. The most important thing that I think to a lot of people, because we've had the statistics for a long time, that most families that have to go into bankruptcy do it because of medical costs. And with this bill, a single insurer would have $6,400. of both medicine and procedures, and then the health insurance picks up the rest of the cost for that year. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
To lose all of that, plus the work that we do on preventive care and the changing the way we reimburse for of services and against services to outcomes is terribly important, and the things that we need to do. So there's nothing more. So we've all said everything that needs to be said. And I do think that the President's action today, if everybody wants to buy these substandard plans, then let them do it. But what he did this morning was make this legislation totally unnecessary. If you're trying to save people so that they can have bad insurance, then he took care of that this morning. I would like to have seen you pull this bill off the calendar.
Could I ask to respond?
Absolutely, please do.
Let me first say that you started out, Congresswoman, by saying that what the Republicans really want to do is repeal, and this was, I think you said, the 48th repeal. Mm-hmm. And not for anything, but it seems clear to me that Dr. Burgess and Congresswoman Fox essentially admitted that. I mean, they said that this is not fixing the bill, this is repeal, and this is because they feel that the bill is a bad bill and they want it repealed. So I don't know why we're even having the discussion, really, because this is the 48th repeal. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. The other thing I was critical of in my opening statement is that, they're constantly going after the president, and I think that was clear as well. Mm-hmm. She said that I forget what she said, his credibility is in shambles.
And ours too.
And ours too. And it's just very unfortunate that we've gotten to this. So. But the one thing I have to disagree completely with Congresswoman Fox is this whole idea of freedom, okay? And this is what you pointed to. This is a capitalist system. This is private insurance. This is not government-run insurance. I'm not going to get into whether one is better, but the reality is it's private insurance. And the insurance companies are still free today, regardless of what the president does and regardless of what Mr. Upton does with this bill, to cancel whatever they want. And my point is, we don't know why they're canceling these policies. I believe that in many cases the policies are canceled because in some cases they've simply moved out of the insurance market or out of the state altogether. In other cases because they don't think they can compete. Mm-hmm. What we've set up is a competitive marketplace. And one of the ways that this becomes a competitive marketplace is because it has a larger insurance pool with a lot of people in it, people that weren't in it before. And many of them, are younger and are healthier. And that's a good thing because they might get sick too. But the fact of the matter is it's a competitive system. That's all it is here. That's what this marketplace is all about. It is freedom, okay? And we can't stop the insurance companies from canceling or doing whatever they want. Now, what the president did today, and again, whether you think is good or not is not the issue. What he basically said is, and he limited, it's not the Upton bill, he said that if you had the policy in 2013 as opposed to 2010, if you had the policy now, since 2010, that you can continue to sell that policy, but only if you want to. We don't know that the insurance companies are going to sell these policies, and I think in many cases they won't. The Upton bill, though, is much more damaging because what the Upton bill says is that insurance policy is out there for sale in 2013, then you can sell it to anybody. And that's the damage. I mean, the president is basically saying, okay, you have this policy now, we'll let you to continue to have it, okay, for another year or whatever. But Upton goes much further. He says that you can take that lousy policy and I can sell it to anybody. So the damage to the insurance pool of that is great because you may have, a lot of younger people or healthier people or wealthier people simply say, well, I'll buy that catastrophic policy or that skeletal policy because I don't think I'm going to get sick. I mean, I think that's a crazy attitude, and I guess you feel there should be some freedom to buy lousy insurance if you think you're not going to go to the hospital. But look, I'm going to say one last thing, Mr. Chairman. We did, the individual market was the Wild West. It really was capitalism gone awry, okay? What we did with the Affordable Care Act is to say, okay, you want to keep those policies, you can, but we really, if you're going to issue a new policy, it has to have a good benefit package, and it's got to be affordable. You can't have a policy that doesn't provide for hospitalization, for example, anymore. That's not going to be allowed once the grandfathered ones expired. So we do have some limitations on the Wild West. You know, we do. It's not a complete individual market, the Wild West, the way it always was. But I think that those kinds of limitations that say to people, look, you can't buy a policy without hospitalization because you're going to end up in the hospital and it's going to cost everybody else money, those kind of limitations are reasonable. But keep in mind, you still can take that crazy policy and go with it. And now the president says you can do it, you know, even if it was sold since 2010. But let's not get away from what we're really trying to do here with the Affordable Care Act, and that is make sure people get insured who are not insured, make sure they get a good policy at an affordable price. So don't sacrifice all that so you can continue to sell these Wild West policies to people who feel, you know, irresponsibly that they can go through life and not have to worry about getting sick. I mean, it's just not the right thing to do. I went on, I'm sorry, but thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Plum. Dr. Burgess.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. Just so the gentleman understands, I was in Edison, New Jersey this last Sunday, and I had probably 40 people that are not in the Wild West express to me a huge concern that they specifically brought to me. So Wild West may be existing in Edison, New Jersey with a group of people. I now defer to the gentleman from Utah. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate being here as the only person on the panel that is from the Wild West. Very proud of it.
Gentlemen, I want you to know I like the Wild West, but not the Wild West in the insurance market.
Well, I've seen Jersey Shore too, so I'm not quite sure exactly where I want to be here. Mr. Burgess, if I could ask you a couple of questions, I'll try and zero in on the bill instead of the rhetoric. If indeed this bill did repeal and replace Obamacare, I would be excited about doing that, but I don't think it's exactly what it does. The President did make an announcement through CMS, I assume today, of some changes, fixes he wanted to implement within what we know as Obamacare. The Upton bill, to which you have referred today, does also some changes and fixes. As I understand, these are not the same thing. There's some vast differences in the approaches both are supposed to do. As far as you know, what legal authority does the President have to make his decisions, to make these fixes, these transitionary changes? Obviously, if the Upton bill passes, it becomes law. As far as your understanding, is there a legal authority for the President to do this?
Well, bear in mind, I'm just a simple country doctor, not a constitutional scholar like the President is. However, the President has unilaterally, during the life of the Affordable Care Act, come forward with changes in his law that have not gone through the legislative process, but they have been instituted as executive actions. We're all familiar with July 2nd of this year when the employer mandate was suspended in a blog post by an employee of the White House. And I have subsequently questioned their authority to be able to do that. I don't think it actually exists. At some point, someone is likely to challenge that in the courts, but the President has established the precedent of just simply changing the law unilaterally on his direction. The danger of what happened today is there's no certainty.
Oh, wait, let me ask you the question first. That's what the follow-up was. Look, if you put it in statute, statute is there.
That's correct.
If you make it simply by an authority that you claim you have that ability to do it, that ability can change, that authority can change. This could change very quickly as well. That the difference between legislation and executive action is one is statutory authority for which you can bank on it. The other is always in a state of flux. And I think that's what you were about to say, wasn't it?
That is exactly what I was about to say.
So let me guess the question. Okay.
All right, please proceed.
No, you said it properly.
But the inherent danger is where is the certainty? I mean, we talk about insurance companies who may want to sell these policies, but they don't know if 2 weeks from now the heat may be off, the public's attention may be diverted to some other activity, and there's no longer the pressing public need to do this, and they could just as easily change their minds back. There is nothing that gets set in stone for the sake of our constituents on this.
So if I also heard the discussion right with everyone so far, this bill that is before us now is not intended to be a solution to fix the problem. This bill is then supposed to give us some breathing room to try and come up so that people are not harmed as we come up with something that can remedy the problems that will take place. I also get frustrated with some of the assumptions that I have heard here today. One I heard was that the overhead for Medicare and Medicaid is like 2%. I saw you react to that. Is there a reason for that reaction?
That's a figure that's often cited, but it's based on fantasy. It's not based on fact. And we had this discussion on the discussions on the public option. If a company says, I want to establish myself as a health insurance company, they will have to go out and price the cost of capital in the market the same as any other business would. Medicare doesn't do that because they have a draw on the federal treasury. So there is no cost of capital for the dollars. And do remember that Medicare runs at a big deficit every year. If they had to go out and borrow that money on the open market, that would be a considerable overhead expense. The other thing to bear in mind is who administers Medicare? Well, it's the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Department of Health and Human Services. They have an enormous budget every year, but that's never factored into the cost of overhead. You go down to your friendly large mega insurance company, they've got a big building, they've got a big price tag that they pay for that, they've got employees. Medicare has CMS, which essentially is just simply a write-off to them.
Let me just finish with this last. I don't want to take too much time here. Only with somewhat sense of frustration as I've heard people making comments about what was there, what will be there. Obviously, in my state, we've had a grand total of 375 who have signed up so far for the exchange. That comes up to a 0.001% of the
Gentleman yield.
population. Yes, sir.
Is that a net of people?
Total, yeah.
So total people that have signed up or a net of the people that also lost?
No, just those who have signed up.
Just those
that
that
does not include those
gentlemen.
who have lost.
Thank you.
And sometimes I'm frustrated because if you compare the total we've seen that have signed up versus those who've gone on state exchanges, the number of the state exchanges is far greater. Also, some of the benefits that are touted that have finally been given with the passage of this bill are benefits that, at least in my state, we always had those before Obamacare was passed. People talk about kids being on their policy. Utah had that decades before anyone even thought of the concept of Obamacare. States had the ability of coming up and doing these things. They had these processes that were there, and they did it much more effectively. It's one of those things that I sometimes get frustrated with people claiming this is a benefit of Obamacare when actually states were doing it well before we even thought of coming up with this type of an approach. So I appreciate you going through the fact that the difference between this bill is it would be the certainty of legislation. It is not the same thing as the President proposed. It is not supposed to be a solution to Obamacare or a fix of Obamacare. It gives us some breathing room to try and stop some of the damage that can be done to people in the present time. And I wanted to be under 5 minutes. I didn't do that, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for that. I will yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time, and I thank the gentleman very much. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Pallone. Dr. Burgess, H.R. 3350, was it marked up in the Energy and Commerce Committee or Ways and Means? Were there specific hearings just on this bill in particular? Is there a reason why not?
This bill is regarded as emergency legislation. There was a large blinking light on the dashboard and something needed to be fixed. There were hearings on the grandfathered plans.
On this bill? Not on this bill.
On the grandfathered plans. We've had probably 6 hearings in the past year.
What I'm just trying to understand is we used to have this thing called regular order. And Speaker Boehner, when he became Speaker, talked about regular order and that major pieces of legislation would go through committees of jurisdiction, that they would be marked up before they come to the Rules Committee. And there's a pattern developing where major pieces of legislation are bypassing committees of jurisdiction entirely, coming to the Rules Committee and going to the House floor under closed rules. You cut $40 billion out of the SNAP program, throwing 3.8 million people off the program. Hundreds of thousands of kids will lose their access to free breakfast and lunch. Didn't go through the Agriculture Committee. I know that because I sat on that committee. I got on that committee to try to fight for that. It bypassed the committee entirely and came right to the Rules Committee. This bill could have easily gone yesterday or today for for consideration in the committees of jurisdiction. There could have been a debate. People could have offered amendments in that committee, and yet the Republicans chose not to do that. So I guess my question is regular order dead in this Congress, in this House of Representatives? Because if it is, then that's.
I don't know the answer to your question, but if the answer were yes, it was initiated when you sat on the majority side of this committee. When H.R. 3590 came through your Rules Committee without a single markup or a single hearing in the House of Representatives.
I reclaim my time.
I stipulate that 3200.
I reclaim my time.
The gentleman consumes the time.
The gentleman is wrong. The gentleman is wrong. There were multiple hearings. There were multiple markups on that bill. And
there were markups on 3200, never a one on 3590.
The gentleman is, but here's the deal. There were markups. There were hearings, but there were none on this. So I guess my question to the gentleman, Dr. Burgess, is given the fact that we're not following regular order here, where you got a bill that's bypassing the committees of jurisdiction, and it's coming right to the Rules Committee. Nobody has discussed this. There have been no witnesses. We have no idea what every line means in this bill. But given that, there are a lot of members on the committees of jurisdiction. There may be members who are, on other committees who may have some ideas of their own on this bill. Would the gentleman agree, he's on the Rules Committee, that we should have an open rule?
I know that the gentleman will propose an amendment to that effect, and I will oppose it. Look,
thank you for
your question
your candor.
Is, if you wanted regular order, we could have avoided a lot of this difficulty today had you followed regular order on H.R. 3590. 3200 was a bill that was marked up in the House.
Mr. Chairman, this is not fair.
Both gentlemen will suspend. I would acknowledge that this committee does have a very important bill before us. And for the sake of the gentlewoman who is transcribing, I would like to ask that both sides continue to operate in a way that would allow her a chance, and also would ask the general decorum. The gentleman from Texas is not being admonished at all. The gentleman is offering a vigorous defense of what he was asked. What I would ask is that we please remember that the gentleman from Massachusetts controls the time, and I'd like to ask that as he asks the questions, as there are questions, then the gentleman from Texas would answer. Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
So I'll ask the gentleman again for a yes or no answer. Will the gentleman support an open rule, given the fact that the committees of jurisdiction have not had hearings on this bill and have not had any markups?
No.
Okay. And so, here you have it. And to just tag on to what the ranking member said earlier, the gentleman from Texas has admitted it. The gentlewoman from North Carolina has admitted it. I mean, I think everybody on the Republican side, if asked, would admit the fact that the ultimate goal here is to repeal the bill entirely. The Speaker of the House made it clear this morning that this is part of the Republicans' latest attack as part of their, quote, targeted strikes strategy to, quote, topple the law. And as he put it today, the plan of sabotage and repeal is, quote, being executed as we speak, end quote. So we got the politics of this down. I guess here's the kind of philosophical difference here. What the President is supporting and what many Democrats are supporting, and again, this is not my idea of a perfect bill. If I would have written this, it would have been more like what Ranking Member Slaughter had talked about. But I think what his goal is to make sure that every single person in this country has access to good, quality, affordable health care. They have health insurance. They have the security of health insurance. That's the goal. It mystifies me why that's such a radical idea. But that's the goal. And yes, this bill has had some glitches and some problems. And to the President's credit, he's taken responsibility. His predecessor didn't take any responsibility when he told us there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and sent all of our young men and women off to die in that war. But this President's taken responsibility. And I give him credit for that. And the fact of the matter is, what he is asking people to do is to work with him to make sure we reach the goal where everybody in this country has good quality health insurance. That should not be that big of a deal. I would like to think that that was one thing that Republicans and Democrats could agree on. But what has become clear to me as someone who's been here for a long time, and I said to the gentleman, Dr. Burgess, your party has been content with allowing tens of millions of Americans to go without health insurance. You've allowed it to happen. Every time we tried in the past, I remember when Bill Clinton tried, it was sabotaged. This president tried, and now it's enacted into law, and now it's sabotage again. And I guess I would just say to everybody, we're going to go through this little exercise tomorrow, this exercise in politics, because that's what this is all about. But at some point, we got to stop worrying about political posturing and start worrying about how do we make sure that everybody in this country has access to good quality health insurance. I mean, that should be the goal. And and these nasty attacks and some very personal attacks as well just have to stop. And people need to get serious about trying to come together and let's fix what is wrong in this bill. Let's do all we can to make sure that it works, so that everybody, not just the privileged few who currently have it. I mean, there are tens of millions of people who do not have health insurance right now, and not every state, by the way, allowed parents to keep their children on their health insurance until they're 26. You have some states that still regard women as being a woman as a pre-existing condition. I mean, we got to stop this. This is getting old, and we got to try to make this work. And so I would just close by saying, I get it. Your political talking points have already been made public. Everybody on your side wants to repeal it. But boy, what a waste of time! What an incredible waste of time when we could be coming together to try to fix this, to make it work, to get everybody the health insurance they need. I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
The gentleman,
If
the gentleman from Massachusetts has yields back his time, and I thank the gentleman very much. Excuse me, the witness has a question for the chairman.
Yeah, I'll be permitted 30 seconds for a response.
The gentleman is recognized.
The sad fact of the matter is that more people are losing their insurance than will ever be gaining insurance under the Affordable Care Act, and that sad fact was revealed today by the administration. Yeah, it's a shame we couldn't have worked together. I came to this committee with 18 amendments to this thing trying to help you in 2010, and you would not allow me the opportunity to even have a vote on those amendments. So I fail to see how today I am somehow to be vilified for preventing your bill, your law, from being more perfect. I tried to help in that endeavor and was certainly shown by the door by the Rules Committee when the gentleman was in the majority.
Well, the gentleman's time has now expired.
Mr. Chairman, can I
just a moment, please? If the gentleman please suspend. Does the gentleman seek to be recognized again?
I do, just for 10.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
I would just say to the gentleman, with all due respect, there was a committee process that the Affordable Care Act went through. Lots of hearings, lots of markups. That was denied here. And on top of that, you were saying you were going to go to the House floor under a completely closed rule. I just, I get it. You can do it. You're in charge.
Did this come under a closed rule?
It came under a closed rule, but it also was the result of vigorous debate and many amendments in committee. You've denied us that, and on top of that, we're going to get a closed rule. So I'm simply saying to the gentleman, you can do it because you're in charge, but understand what you're doing here. You're reneging on the Speaker's promise of regular order. This is not regular order. This is not the first time, by the way, this has happened. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back his time. The chair would note that today the committee does believe it has 2 expert witnesses from the United States Congress, including the authorizing committee of the Energy and Commerce, who are available to this committee. It is considered a public hearing, and I would certify that both gentlemen that are here have represented not only themselves well and their parties well, but also the committee well. And so there may be evidence that could be presented that there have not been other public hearings on this. However, this committee today, I would certify that it is. We do have certifiably responsible people who recognize that. Does the gentleman from New Jersey wish
Well,
to
I
ask
just
the
wanted
chairman
to,
a question?
yeah, if I could just,
Does the gentleman wish to be recognized for a
if
minute?
I could, Mr.
The gentleman is recognized.
I just wanted to point out, look, the Health Subcommittee and the Full Energy and Commerce Committee have met several times in the last few weeks, before the break, after the break. There was ample opportunity if Mr. Upton, who's the chairman of the committee and the sponsor of the bill, wanted to bring this up in regular order, either in the subcommittee or the full committee, to do that. I mean, it could have been on any of the occasions over the last few weeks. We've had so many hearings over the last few weeks, there could have been markups and hearings or whatever. So the notion that there wasn't the opportunity, I don't know that that's what Mr. Burgess said, but if I don't want anybody to give the impression that the committee wasn't meeting, subcommittee, full committee, many times over the last few weeks. There was ample opportunity to bring this up. And the other thing I would say, too, is, you know, I keep hearing from the other side that the president or the Democrats don't want to work with the Republicans on this. And it's clear to me from what the president did today that he does want to work on a bipartisan basis and that he does want to try to reach out and fix things that he thinks can be corrected. And that's what he did. Look, some of the things that were in the Upton bill are actually in the executive order that he's proposing. But I also need to stress that it goes much further, particularly in saying that people who are new customers to these grandfathered policies can now participate. And that's probably the most damaging thing in terms of breaking the insurance pool and sabotaging Obamacare. But look, the president is out front many times. I don't think he should be criticized or because he's trying to make changes. He should be praised. He many times has responded to the Republican concerns and said that he wants to. Some people don't even like the fact that he's responded. But to suggest in some way that he hasn't been forthcoming, that he's not trying to respond, I mean, today's just another example of that effort. So, again, I don't know why we're here in light of
I thank the gentleman. I do know why we're here. I called a committee hearing today, and you are representing the committee.
Oh, no, I'm
you
not suggesting that, Mr. Chairman. I don't want you to give the impression that I think that you shouldn't have the hearing. I'm just saying that a lot of what is in that Upton bill
the gentleman is suspended. If the gentleman does not want to be here or does not understand why he's here, perhaps counsel or someone else can help you. But this committee hearing was called today as a result of H.R. 3350, and that's what we're trying to discuss. Gentleman's time is now expired. The gentleman, the chairman from Oklahoma, is recognized. Chairman, Mr. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank both my friends for being here. You're two of the members actually I respect the most around here, and I know you don't always agree, but I always learn something listening to each one of you, so thank you for being here. A couple of questions, and these are addressed to both of you. Either one can answer first and the other one second. Did either of you anticipate that we would have the sheer number of canceled insurance policies that we're having now?
You want me to answer? I mean, look, the bottom line, and I appreciate the respect you're giving us, is that insurance policies in the individual market in particular, which is what we're talking about here, are canceled on a regular basis. I mean, I think I have some statistics, if you want them, that show that I actually have some information on that, if I could give it to you in terms of the numbers. If I can find it here, this was stated today when we had our hearing in Energy and Commerce about the individual market. If I can find it a minute. Yeah, here we go. 50% of individual market enrollees, well, this is leave their plans every year, but I have some statistics, I think, about the actual coverage. Here we go. More than 50% of people in the individual market leave in a given year, and over 80% after 2 years. The problem, and I don't want to belabor the point, is that in the individual market, and I use the term Wild West, I wasn't referencing Texas, there is constant turnover, and there's constant cancellation of policies. So there's no reason to be surprised by the fact that so many of these policies have been canceled.
But if I may, well, then isn't the president seems surprised? I mean, look, I'm not trying to be argumentative here, but
I think the president is surprised.
Let me finish my question.
Sure.
I'll let you finish your point, and I'll go to Dr. Burgess next. Because on the one hand, and I understand what you're saying. Look, I've been in the individual market, and there's certainly a great deal of flux and change and what have you. And some of that's driven by policy. Some of it's just driven by all of a sudden you're not in the individual market anymore. You go to work for a company. It just happens. But, you know, I don't think you can say on the one hand that this is normal and this is kind of what occurs all the time, and on the other hand, hold a presidential press conference today that says, with a huge apology, and I got things wrong and I didn't understand what was happening. It's clearly not normal. I mean, both those things can't be true.
Well, I think if I could just say simply this, I think that you guys on the Republican side have really stressed, you know, this statement that the president said you could keep your policy, period. I mean, that's what I keep hearing. The president said you could keep your policy, period. I don't think his intention ever was to say that he could force insurance companies to sell a policy that they didn't want to sell.
Look,
that's the problem.
It's the president who's apologized for misleading people.
Well, he can do whatever he wants. I'm not going to speak for him.
And he has.
But I'm just pointing out to you that a lot of these policies were canceled probably because they couldn't sell them anymore.
Then did the president expect this to happen?
Oh, I have no idea what he expected.
Well, then, again, it can't be both the normal occurrence that happens all the time and the president then be surprised by what the normal occurrence and hold a press conference to apologize and say we're going to fix a problem that's a normal situation.
I think he's trying to be a nice guy and trying to say that he wants to address some of the concerns that you have raised, you know, even in the Upton bill.
I'll let the president speak for himself.
Yeah.
I'd be the first to posit he is a nice guy. I've dealt with him before. I wouldn't question that at all.
Right.
But I don't think this is what he anticipated would be happening. I don't think this is the normal state of affairs. Or if it is, he's shocked by what's normal.
But what was anticipated, Congressman, what was anticipated is that eventually policies that were lousy, that didn't provide good coverage, would disappear because good policies with good benefits at a lower price would be available.
Then was he surprised at what happened?
Well, I think that it's a question of when that happens. You know, maybe he thought more would sell the lousy policies than wanted to. I don't know. But the point of the matter is, eventually, these types of policies that were skeletal were going to disappear just through competition because people wouldn't buy them anymore.
Got the point. Let me allow Dr. Burgess to respond. I've got some other questions.
Well, the question, was anyone surprised? We shouldn't have been. In fact, I wrote a letter to the conference. It's dated May 5th, 2010. And in the letter, one thing is clear. The employers and employees of America who were told they'd be able to keep their health care coverage were not told the truth. May of 2010, a month or so after the law was signed. Leader Pelosi has on her website, greater choice. You can keep your doctor, keep your current health plan if you like them. So it wasn't just spoken by the president. It was spoken by the Democratic leader here in the House of Representatives. Look, there is a flashing red light on the dashboard. It says you're out of oil. It says your engine is fixing to seize. That's what the president was responding to today. I don't know why that snuck up on him like it did. Certainly there have been people trying to tell him for some time that this thing was headed for disaster. His own experience on October 1st through 5th should have told him that things were not as people had instructed them. I'll just tell you the absolutely stunning thing to me is that no one in the administration has been held accountable for the fact that there are so many problems with this thing.
Well, again, I want to just make this point. This is my view. I don't think, I know a lot of people predicted this. I don't think the president expected this. If he did, things would have been probably different coming up. He wouldn't have been on television today, you know, making a proposal, apologizing, saying, I'm sorry to Democrats that we mishandled this. So this is not an anticipated situation. Having said that, next question, and again, I would direct it to both of you. Did either of you have an opportunity to see what the president was going to propose or were consulted in terms of a fix that, you know, sort of the measures he announced today? Were either of you aware of them?
I don't want to shock the gentleman, but I'm frequently not consulted by the White House when they do pronouncements.
Was a proposal, a paper, anything put out, or did we hear about it pretty much when the president announced it?
No email.
You may have had access. You may have known, so I don't know.
I didn't have any special access, and I don't have any paper. But I would say that it was clear that he was responding to the concerns that were expressed about
If Jim will suspend, does the gentleman have his mic on? I think the gentleman's recognized.
But the one thing that I want to stress again is, even if this I think to some extent, and I don't want to be disrespectful, I think to some extent we all have to recognize that whether the Upton bill passes, whatever the president does today with the executive order, eventually, and probably sooner than we think, these policies, these grandfathered so-called policies, are going to disappear because people aren't going to want to buy them anymore. That's my point. So I think a lot of the discussion we have ultimately isn't going to matter because I don't think these insurance companies are going to sell them or be able to sell them.
My friend may well be right. All I'm saying is we clearly have a situation that was not anticipated. The president's kind of scrambling to respond. I don't have any problem with that. He sees crisis. He's trying to deal with it. I would suggest that's probably what Chairman Upton's trying to do, is respond to something as well. They both evidently see a problem in terms of the sheer number of cancellations. So, I don't know why one response would be legitimate and the other one illegitimate. They're both trying to respond to what they perceive to be a problem. I don't think the president's been particularly forthcoming about telling us. He's trying to sort of do this on the fly and doing it in a hurry, and evidently doing it in response to the Upton bill. I think the Upton bill is trying to get ahead of the problem and not fix it, because I agree very much with the statement that Dr. Burgess made. I don't think this is fixable, but I think you do what you can to try and keep millions of people from losing their insurance. And I posit that that's what the president's trying to do.
The only thing I'm trying to tell you is do not be surprised if, regardless of what the president did today, or regardless of whether the Upton bill became law, that very few of these insurance companies are going to sell these products anymore. Wow. Do not be surprised.
Back to my point, that may well be true. Then the president shouldn't have been surprised. I don't hear him saying what my friend is saying. I don't hear him saying, don't be surprised, we anticipated
this. But the problem is that a lot of Americans, because of our debate, a lot of Americans think that tomorrow or next week or in 6 months, they're going to be able to buy these policies. I don't think there are going to be that many that are going to be selling them. So, the problem is we can't give people the impression that because of the president's statement today or because of the Upton bill, that somehow miraculously these policies are going to reappear.
I'm not trying to give anybody the impression of anything, and I don't think Chairman Upton's trying to do that. I don't assume the president's trying to do that. I think they're both trying to respond to what they see as something that at least was not anticipated by the administration, which was there were going to be all these cancellations and all this reaction. And I would hope while they're thinking about it this year, they think about it next year, because the problem is about 10 times bigger next year. They evidently knew something was wrong when they postponed the business mandate. And there's a lot more Americans insured by businesses than there are in the individual market, a point that the president makes and makes correctly and appropriately repeatedly. But that tells me if this is happening in the individual market, what assurance do I have next year when the group market hits this, that we're not going to see, tens of thousands of companies dumping their policies. So I hope the administration looks at what happened here, which they clearly did not anticipate, and thinks this problem is going to be 10 times bigger next year, and it's going to affect the estimates I've read are 32 to 54 million Americans. We better think about this now. I'd like to see a solution for next year as well as scrambling this year. Another question I want to put to both of you, and this may help clarify, because I did not have a chance to hear the president's remarks today, just part of the press conference. Have not really had a chance to see much in the way, or anything really, in the way of paper on his proposal. I'll agree with my friends. I've only seen the Upton proposal very recently too, so I don't pretend to be as familiar with that as I would like to be before we have to vote on it. So are there any, if you're aware, are there common elements? I mean, if you guys could what's the difference between what the president is proposing today and what the Upton bill is offering?
My understanding in general, and I can't get into too many specifics, is that what I basically said before. In other words, right now, before the president's speech and before Upton, you could only grandfather a policy that was in effect in March of 2010, okay? Policies that were sold after that, which I think many are skeletal and not valuable, including policies that are sold now in 2013, you could be grandfathered. So insurance company could sell a policy, I'll call it skeletal, in 2013 through into next year. What the President doesn't allow, and Upton does, is for people who were not customers and did not have those insurance policies to now buy similar policies.
Is that the biggest single difference?
Well, the other difference, and this goes to one of your other points, I think, is that if they decide to sell a 2013 policy, they have to point out how it's skeletal as opposed to what they would get in the marketplace. And they have to tell people that they can go into the marketplace. And see, this is my point, and I'll stop, is that I think part of the problem now is that when people get the cancellation notice, they're sometimes told or sometimes not. But if they try to go to the marketplace, it's broken for the most part. And so they can't see that they can get a good benefit package at an even lower price. And that's when they do that, and that's what the President says they must do if they decide to sell these policies, they're not going to opt for the old policy. And that's why I think they'll disappear. But that is part of what the President says as well in his executive order.
Give my friend Mr. Burgess a chance to respond.
Well, if I had the option to go back to the policy I've had for several years, I would do so in a heartbeat. Health savings account is not going to be available in the federally run marketplace in the state of Texas. Yeah, I'll be able to buy a policy with a high deductible. I got no problem with that, but I think if we're going to require people to buy an insurance policy with a very medium actuarial value where they may face a $6,000 deductible, we ought to allow them to put money into a health savings account to pay. I mean, look, not every medical bill that comes across your desk needs to be paid by an insurance company. No one would think of filing a claim on aspirin or Band-Aids. That would be silly. There are some expenses that are more medium in nature that could be met with a health savings account, and that should be permitted. That's what I've done for the past 15 or 20 years. If I required arthroscopy on a knee, right, that's generally not going to be covered by my high deductible policy. It'll be outside the limits of that deductible, but I have money saved that I have saved in a health savings account over time to be able to pay for that expense. We lose that in the marketplace going forward. I don't think there's anything really in the Upton bill or the President's proclamation that will allow that to happen, but that is an important part of controlling the cost of health care, which we are losing under the Affordable Care Act. The number one difference as I see it between what the President did today and the Upton bill is one is a legislative product and one is a product of executive fiat. And we all know that executive fiat can change upon the whim of the executive. That's why this country does not have a ruler. This country has an executive and a legislative branch, and we are supposed to, the interworking is supposed to occur. That's the advantage of the Upton bill. It doesn't fix a damn thing in the Affordable Care Act, but at least allows for a legislative fix to that cry for help that we're hearing from our citizens.
Do either of you have doubts as to whether or not the President actually has the authority to do what he proposed today?
I have no doubt that he has the authority.
I have doubts, but again, I'm having to rely upon the constitutional scholar, Dr. Dean, Howard Dean, who said that he had doubts too. So apparently, within the medical community, whether you're on the right or the left of the issue, there is some question. I mean, look, this is going to be litigated. Let's not kid ourselves. Every part of the Affordable Care Act, it's slow in process, but it will all be litigated. I don't think the President had the power to delay the employer mandate. I don't think he had the power to delay the reporting requirements that he did subsequent to that. I have a list of some 13 or 15 things that the President has changed about his own law. And, Mr. Chairman, with all respect, I'd like to submit that as part of the record, along with the 7 times that the President has signed into law legislation that we have sent to him that will fundamentally change parts of the Affordable Care Act. I mean, there has been a lot that has changed since that signing ceremony in March of 2010. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think the President has the authority. That will obviously be argued by greater legal minds than mine.
Okay, and we all know, of course, our authority is limited too. And while the Upton bill and I'll grant the President's effort, they're both, whether they're appropriate or complete, they're probably both well-intentioned effort to deal with a problem that they perceive, which is millions of people losing their insurance. We pass something tomorrow that didn't become law. We have a United States Senate that has to pass something too. And to my friends on the other side that have concern, and there is a Democratic proposal by a Democratic senator who voted for the legislation and who claims that what she's trying to do is certainly not trying to undermine it, and she's got a vehicle over there, which evidently is attracting a great deal of Democratic and some Republican support, from what I hear. And so maybe they'll actually pass a bill, and then we can go to conference and have an opportunity to sit down and see if we can do something. So, for good or ill, we don't have the ability to do in a rapid way what the president as an executive has the ability to do and is evidently trying to do. But, to my friends who are worried about this, it's an undermining effort. I mean, what are you worried about? You got the United States Senate and the President of the United States with a veto. I would actually say this is a real effort to try and do what the President's trying to do. There's a Democratic effort underway in a Democratic House to, again, do something about this. It suggests to me that everybody sees it as a big problem and not as the normal thing, and that lots of folks certainly were surprised by this, certainly didn't anticipate coming, and that hopefully some of them are thinking about what's going to come next year, because this thing gets a lot bigger, and maybe we can get to some way to solve this. So I want to commend Chairman Upton and my friend for trying to do it. I also want to commend my good friend from New Jersey as well, who always makes good and thoughtful points. But let's not kid ourselves that the White House thought this was coming, anticipated it. If they did, they wouldn't have been out holding press conferences today, and they wouldn't be out announcing fixes to problems they said didn't exist 3 weeks ago. So they think they've got a big problem. This is an effort to try to help it. It's probably constitutionally, if it were to pass and a companion bill in the Senate passed and we go to conference, then there's not much question about the authority to do anything. I think the administration would be well advised, my personal advice, invite Congress to get into this thing. I mean, you own it now. Not you, but I mean the administration owns it now. And if I were them, I would be inviting congressional help. Indeed, the President did that today in his remarks. He said, if people want to help, this is an effort to help. We'll see if our friends on the other side of the rotunda can come up with an effort to help, be it Democrat or Republican. And if I were them, I would start trying to involve people. But if they try to keep doing what Dr. Burgess laid out and do one executive fix after another, number one, I don't think they're likely to work. I think they're questionable constitutionally. I share my friend's concerns. But more than that, politically, if you don't invite somebody in to help you, you're going to own it. And so every time there's a mistake, and this has been a big mistake, that's the President's told us that. I mean, he's been apologizing to his side of the aisle and to the American people and to everybody else he can talk to for about a week. So it clearly wasn't the right thing from his point of view. Get the other side involved. Maybe they've got some ideas on some of these things. And to my friends who say we only try to overturn, defeat, defund, and that's fair. I mean, we don't support the bill, so of course we're going to try and do it. But as, again, Dr. Burgess pointed out, on 7 occasions, some of our ideas were good enough that a Democratic Senate adopted them and a Democratic president signed them. They saved collectively about $62 billion, and they must have thought those 7 ideas were in the interest of trying to reform and change, move on. This may well be too. So, and I suspect tomorrow there'll be a fair number of Democrats that probably vote with Chairman Upton on this. Maybe not. Maybe it becomes a party line vote. But I suspect there'll be some that, even if they don't agree with it all, say this is at least an effort to move, and there'll be something coming in the other chamber, and maybe we can actually have a bipartisan fix to a problem that it clearly is of great scope and great consequence and great concern to the American people. With that, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've been very indulgent. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman from Florida, the gentleman, Judge Hastings, recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to include in the record the statement offering amendments of our colleague, Congresswoman Jackson.
Exception be entered in the record.
Thank you.
Gentleman's recognized.
Chairman, I can't hear the gentleman.
If the gentleman would please suspend for just a minute.
Yes.
Judge Hastings, one of your witnesses has advised us that he cannot hear you.
No problem.
And I would ask that you get a little bit closer to me. Gentleman's recognized. And I thank the gentleman from Texas.
He will hear me soon. Dr. Burgess indicated earlier, when our colleague, Mr. McGovern, was putting a process question to him about this being a closed rule and whether or not there had been a markup or hearings. In part, the response of Dr. Burgess was that this is an emergency. And then later, he and others have commented correctly that the President's comment with reference to an insurance policy of an individual was that if you have a policy and you wish to keep that policy, you can keep it, period. I have seen that comment made by the President on several different occasions or in several fora. But I also was present on January 5th of 2011. And at that time, when the distinguished Speaker of the House was sworn in as Speaker, among the things that he said was the following: we gather here today at a time of great challenges, when nearly 1 in 10 of our neighbors is out of work. Health care costs are still rising for American families. Now, I've made the comment in this Rules Committee more times than a little, and I've asked members who were present to please raise their hands, and this is before the Affordable Health Care Act. Please raise your hands if you have health insurance that has gone down in any year that you have had it. Yeah, yours went down with no increase in deductible and no things that were excluded. Of course.
When I was elected to the United States House of Representatives, there was no option for a health savings account. I had held a health savings account for years back in Texas when I ran my medical practice. I made a health savings account available to any employee who desired one. I helped them with the money in the health savings account to cover the deductible. But when I got here, much to my surprise, I found there was no such product available. So I bought insurance in the Federal Employee Health Benefits Plan, as was available to me in 2003. And that was a PPO plan, which was, of course, significantly more expensive than my high-deductible health plan that I had back in Texas. Fortunately, under the leadership of Chairman Davis on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, they did begin a health savings account option, and I believe it was 2005 or 2006. I switched the PPO coverage in the Federal Employee Health Benefit Plan to a high-deductible plan. Saved the federal government significant money for their contribution.
A high deductible
and saved
plan.
Myself. But the point is, Mr. Hastings, under the bronze plan or the silver plan, what does a 60% actuarial value mean? When your constituents say, okay, look, I can get this bronze plan and it isn't going to break the bank, it's $400 or $600 a month, but they go to the emergency room with a kidney stone, guess what? They're getting a $4,000 bill because their deductible is $6,800. That's what a 60% actuarial value means to your constituents.
Right, well,
the difference is they don't get the health savings account. They don't get the ability to put money away pre-tax as I did in a health savings account. I think it's a crying shame we lost that under the Affordable Care Act.
All right. Well, I thank you. And in part, your response was that it went down. But in the other part, when I cited to you that you had a high deductible, that has to be among the reasons why you may have paid less than when you practiced law. I'm going to get back to you, practice medicine. I'm going to get back to you about your practice of medicine. But I'm going to stay on process. Really, the truth of the matter is the closed rule has been the most common rule reported out of this committee over the past year, period. if we want to talk about period. Openness is what the Speaker of the House of Representatives said would be the standard, and I want to not misquote him. Among the many things in his glowing comment dealing with legislation was the following. Old rules that have made it easy to increase spending will be replaced by new rules that make it easier to cut spending. Above all else, we will welcome the battle of ideas, encourage it and engage in it openly, honestly, and respectfully. As the chamber closest to the people, the House works best when it is allowed to work its will. And I ask all members of this body to join me in recognizing this common truth. To my colleagues in the majority, my message is this: we will honor our pledge to America, built through a process of listening to the American people. We will stand firm on our constitutional principles that built our party and built our great nation. We will do these things, however, in a manner that restores and respects the time-honored right of the minority to an honest debate and a fair, open process, period. And to my friends in the minority, I offer a commitment: openness, once a tradition of this institution, but increasingly scarce in recent decades. It will be the new standard. There were no open rules in the House in the last Congress. In this one, there will be many. But with this restored openness, however, comes a restored responsibility. You will not have the right to willfully disrupt the proceedings of the People's House, but you will always have the right to a robust debate in open process that allows you to represent your constituents, to make your case, offer alternatives, and be heard. He goes on, and the essence of it is that what he has said is that there will be openness, period. And because of that, I believe that the measure, and I was astounded when I saw Chairman Upton's request of the committee. Normally when members come here and we ask them whether or not they would offer that we have a rule, or what kind of rule would they offer for the chair and the majority and this committee, the normal response is that's left up to your committee or to the Rules Committee. But in this particular instance, the letter to the chairman of this committee from Chairman Upton was that he wanted there to be a closed rule on something as critical as this, be it an emergency or not. And it's not an emergency. The only thing it is an emergency to make a political statement regarding fumbling that has occurred on two occasions, one having to do with the rollout of some technology, and the second having to do with some millions of people receiving a letter from their insurance company indicating that they wouldn't be insured under that particular provision. So this so-called fix that we're talking about, to answer my good friend from Oklahoma, a distinguishing feature in this particular measure is that it would allow enrollees, new enrollees, to the process of the individual market. And that distinguishes itself from what I believe the President proposed today. Coming from the mild southeast, I gather that the metaphor that was used by Mr. Pallone wasn't pleasing to some when he was merely referring to what occurred before the Affordable Health Care Act. So, Dr. Burgess, I ask you, you practiced medicine. How long did you practice medicine?
25 years.
And during that period of time, did you have any feeling at all that the health care system in America was broken?
I don't know if I thought a lot about the healthcare system in America. I thought about taking care of my patients to the best of my ability and rendering the best care that I possibly could, or if it was beyond my scope and knowledge, I would refer them to someone who
Did you go to your medical associations and have continuing medical experiences? And in those meetings, did physicians say that the system was just hunky-dory and it's just working just fine?
Well, I did attend those meetings, and most of the difficulties that we encountered actually were visited upon us either by state or federal government.
Mm-hmm. But no matter how they came to visit you, the simple fact of the matter is that you didn't feel that the system was a great system in terms of whether or not it needed repair.
Well, I felt strongly enough about playing a role in the future of health policy that I ran for and was successful in becoming an alternate delegate to the American Medical Association, because I thought if I could get to the House of Delegates at the American Medical Association, I would be right there where the key decisions were made. Unfortunately, my first House of Delegates meeting, I very quickly came to understand that there wasn't, sometimes there wasn't the authority there with the House of Delegates. We complained, as doctors are wont to do, but the solutions were elusive. In the middle of that first House of Delegates meeting, there was a new concept that was brought to the floor of the House of Delegates, and that was that the United States Congress, or I'm sorry, more appropriately, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services had decided, because of a bill passed by the Congress, that physician reimbursement would be reduced 5.4% for calendar year 2002. I thought that was exactly the wrong approach. If they were attempting to hold down costs, there were different ways to do that. In fact, if you reduce the amount of payment to a physician, physicians with fixed overhead are simply going to run faster on the treadmill, and as a consequence, your costs are going to go up. And that is what the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services has found. But most of the difficulties that I encountered were, again, visited upon me by what used to be known as HECFA, and now is known as the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and the Department of Health and Human Services, the Federal Trade Commission. Most of the things that I thought made our practice harder and made it harder to care for our patients were, in fact, some of the things that, the very things that we deal with here on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm. Sounds to me like under state government in Texas and the federal government under Democrats and Republicans, that you as a physician and other physicians may have experienced problems, giving rise certainly to a need to fix the system. Do you think it's fair, Doctor, to have more than 40 million people in America not have insurance?
I don't know if fair is the correct word. I mean, look,
do you think it's right?
I think people have a responsibility to themselves and their families to take the best possible care they can of their health, and if that includes having a health insurance policy, and that's certainly not everyone. There are some people who feel strongly that that's not something that they choose to do, and we've heard about them since the mandate was passed. But the fact of the matter is, there were plenty of nights that I knew I was going to be up all night, taking the best care I possibly could of someone who the likelihood of any sort of compensation or remuneration was not just low, it was non-existent.
Right, and they wound up at the emergency room.
They wound up in my labor and delivery unit.
Right, and your labor delivery, however it is they came there, they didn't have insurance when they were asked the questions, and you continued your moral obligation as a physician to go ahead and treat them. But let me tell you what else happened when that happened. You and other Texans who were taxpayers paid for that. Now, y'all keep going and dancing all around, not you, Dr. Burgess, but everybody in this institution keeps dancing around the fact that there are people that don't have any money. There are people that don't have a job. There are people that don't have any ability at all to get any kind of insurance. And going low under the radar in this particular process that we have continued to deal with, and I have said repeatedly on the floor and in this committee and in other committees, that we should never say the words Medicare without saying the word Medicaid. Now, I visited lots of my friends over the course of years who wound up are bankrupt because of medical conditions. And evidently y'all haven't had that happen to anybody. I've visited many of my friends that wound up in nursing homes on Medicaid, and yet I have a governor in my state and the state of 3 others of us who wouldn't even expand the Medicaid program. So you help to create the problem, and then you turn around and say there's a problem that I don't want to fix. And then I guess my ultimate question to you is, where's your plan? And where is the plan of the Republican Party? I saw Mr. Scalise here, and I thought he did a very good job in responding to me when I asked him that question. He said he had a plan, and he enumerated it. He outlined it. So I checked the other day, as a matter of fact, I checked today about whether or not the 200-plus Republicans had signed on to the Scalise plan. No, 104 are co-sponsors at this point. Now, all I say to y'all is you just keep going around beating up on this particular situation. You've done a good job. You've poisoned the well. You have governors. You have an echo chamber that has done everything that it can to make sure that people in this country don't get health insurance, that this president and people like me who would have preferred single-payer and universal health care or would have much preferred that that be the case so that everybody in this country, even if it means me paying more, everybody in this country would have access to affordable health care. And let me end by saying to you, Dr. Fox, saying that people don't have credibility. She's not here. Tell her in my absence, or her absence, what I said. I hope that she would be here. Saying that people don't have credibility is not constructive in the legislative process. Ms. Slaughter has pointed it out, Mr. McGovern pointed it out, and I want to continue it. I will disagree with you about a lot of things, but I will not call into question your credibility. Now, this president won his election by 5 million votes, and he won his election after the passage of the Affordable Health Care Act, which to a relative degree could be argued that it was at least the same mandate that any other president had because he got elected. And I would remind you all, when you go around running off your mouths talking about credibility, friend I used to play poker with, when he would leave the poker game having lost his money, we would tease him. And Clarence would look back and say, you remember, the wind doesn't blow up the same dog's tail always. We may be glum today as Democrats. We're not in shambles. I certainly am not. I have a fundamental disagreement with many of you in this room with reference to our responsibilities to each other. I want everybody to have what I have, and I want everybody to have good health insurance. And I defy anybody to tell me that that isn't what they believe. And if you believe it, then you evidently do not believe it well enough to have offered a plan that's the alternative to the Affordable Health Care Plan. What you've done is vote on it now, coming up soon, 46 different times. And you've done an effective job in making it something that looks like the so-called American people. That means 40% of y'all don't want it, when 40% probably do want something. In time, we will come to know that it is better for us to avoid people having financial ruin. It's better for us to have people not be denied coverage because of minor pre-existing conditions. It's better for men and women to pay the same thing for their insurance. It's better to have people not have their insurance dropped at the whim of an insurance company. And there were people that were being dropped from insurance before the Affordable Health Care Act, and I might add in great numbers if you go into it and you look at it. So I said you'd hear me now. The question is, can you hear me now? I don't like what you all are doing, and I don't think it's right. I think what you ought to be doing is fixing. And for my friend from Oklahoma, who I have great respect for, it is that even if the president were to walk in the room and start to talk about let's sit down and fix the Affordable Health Care Act, there ain't nobody on the Republican side that would work with him. And you've evinced that more times than a little bit, not only by your actions, not you, Mr. Cole, but many of your colleagues have made it demonstrably clear that there's nothing that Barack Obama can do that satisfies their requirements. That is unfortunate. I didn't feel that way about President Bush, and I fundamentally disagreed with most of the things that he offered. But I had an opportunity to work with him as you have an opportunity to work with Barack Obama. And so when the deal goes down, it's a dark day for America when we, as their representatives, can't find common ground and can't find reason enough to do the things that are reasonable. If we have to scrap this one, then I want to see the one that you're going to replace it with. And I promise you, I'll work with you if you're going to help me to get those 40-plus million Americans who are uninsured insured and have an opportunity to the same access. Otherwise, just keep on paying because they're going to keep on coming to the emergency room. It's just a matter of time. And I hope I offended all of y'all.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman, is the gentleman seeking a question from the chairman?
I just
is gentleman
grateful
seeking recognition
for time to respond, since most of that was directed at me.
The gentleman's recognized.
I do want the committee to know that I maintain a health policy website. It's not a political site. It's a representational site. It's called healthcaucus.org. On healthcaucus.org, since the spring of 2009, I've had Dr. Burgess's prescriptions for health care reform. They are 9 in number. I did not think it was a good idea to put everything into a single bill, which is one of the philosophical differences I have with the Republican Study Committee product. I believe that if there were problems in the Wild West of the individual market, it was not necessary to destroy the rest of the healthcare market in order to correct those deficiencies. It sounds very much like the general who was oft quoted during the Vietnam War saying we had to destroy the village in order to save it. But let's be honest, the number one cost driver that is really pushing healthcare costs up is not the cost of the free rider who comes into the emergency room who lacked healthcare insurance. It is the fact that we all who have insurance cross-subsidize Medicare and Medicaid to a very large degree. The gentleman asked if I had specific things that I would have changed. He specifically referenced Medicaid. Of course, Medicaid is a federal-state partnership. The state of Texas in the early 1990s offered the first $100,000 of medical liability coverage to any physician who practiced obstetrics who would take a certain percentage of Medicaid patients into their practice. It was a very effective program. For whatever reason, it was not continued, probably because the medical liability climate got very, very difficult in Texas in the 1990s, and they found that they had difficulty in affording it. But it would be that type of approach that I think could be welcomed by the providers across the country. But rather, we've chosen to expand a program that underpays providers repetitively, and we're going to wonder why nobody signs up. And where are those patients going to go? They've now got an insurance card. It says Medicaid on it. It's a joint federal-state program, but the federal government's paying most of the freight. But the doctors aren't seeing the patients. Those patients go where they've always gone, to the highest cost place for them to interface the system, which is the emergency room. Problem not solved. I yield back.
Gentleman sought time and now yields back his time. The gentleman from Georgia, the gentleman, Mr. Woodall's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a little surprised there's been this kind of robust debate. I read this piece of legislation, and I thought, golly, this is maybe the best we can do with what we have to work with, but this is way too little, way too late. The 5 million folks across the country that have already lost their health care policies, they're not going to be helped by this bill. This bill does one thing and one thing only, and Dr. Burgess, I'd welcome your correction if I'm wrong, and that is it allows two things only. It allows me to keep my policy and you to keep your policy, and every American to keep their policy if they like their policy and they had it before October 1st, 2013, and their insurance company believes that it is worth keeping it around since this is only a one-year extension. And number two, it allows my neighbor, if my neighbor thinks I've got a good insurance policy, that my neighbor can buy that insurance policy too. I thought it was interesting. My good friend Mr. Hastings, with whom I agree on much, and one of my favorite folks in the institution, he said, I want everybody to have access to the same insurance policy I have. And I thought, well, that is often the way some of my colleagues define what it means to be compassionate to one's neighbor. I want everybody to have access to the policy that they want to have access to. I don't think that my policy is the only way to serve a family. I think that families should be able to choose the policy that best serves their family. And what's so offensive about this entire piece of legislation that has folks fighting about it since the day it got jammed through this institution, as my friend Dr. Burgess said accurately, without one hearing on the language that passed this institution, not one, is that it presumes that I am not capable of choosing what is best for my family. Mr. Pallone said earlier that it was about these substandard policies that insurance companies want to sell. I say to my friend, it has never been about policies that insurance companies want to sell. It has always been about policies that American families want to buy. That's what the marketplace is about. This is not a free marketplace in the exchanges. The only plans that are available on the exchanges are the plans that you and Mr. Hastings and Mr. McGovern and Ms. Slaughter and the rest of the Democratic caucus that supported this bill without one Republican vote deemed appropriate. Those are the only policies that are available. I would welcome the response because I want to be wrong. I want to believe that you believe that if the men and women of Georgia have a better way to care for one another than the one that you have crafted in New Jersey and that Mr. Hastings has crafted for Florida or that Ms. Slaughter's constituents want in New York, I want to believe that you believe that we should be able to choose the plan that best serves us, not the plan that you and the president think best serves us. And I welcome the gentleman's advice.
Respond, and I don't want to offend you in any way, but I would like, if possible, to get away from what I call the ideology. You know, some people favor single payer. Others believe that, you should be able to buy whatever you want and it doesn't matter if it's the worst thing on earth, okay? I'm just trying to say practically speaking, when most people try to buy health insurance, they do not necessarily get the best information. They do not. The problem here with these cancellations is that these insurance companies are canceling these policies for many different reasons, in my opinion. Some because they want to get out of the market altogether.
To reclaim my time just for a moment, that's part of not giving people the best information. Okay. We know that's patently false.
The point is
that's patently false. Mr. Pallone, you know that these letters, you have seen them yourselves, they say our plans are not compliant with the President's guidelines for what plans must be. You know you have seen those letters.
I've seen all kinds of letters. No, I know, but you got to let me respond.
Well, I mean, look, to be clear, Mr. Pallone, reclaiming my time, if you're going to talk about misinformation that's out there, we shouldn't be complicit in adding to it.
But
you are, in fact, the expert. In just one moment, you are, in fact, the expert witness here.
Let me have, if the gentleman wants to stand here, I'm sorry. I want to make sure that the responses come at least so that she has a chance of doing it.
No, I agree, but I mean, at some
Mr.
point,
Pallone, please, you can't do it by talking over one. He controls the time. If he yields the time to you, you may respond.
Well, I mean,
if somebody, Mr. Pallone, if he yields the time to you, you can respond. Mr. Woodall, you do have the time and you control the time.
Are you going to let me respond at some point, Mr. Woodall? Otherwise, what's the point of my being here?
You have questioned the point of your being here since you walked in the door.
But now you're not letting me
respond. I see great value in you being here. Apparently, you don't see any great value in listening to me. You have absolutely no interest in answering the question I'm asking.
Mr. Pallone, please.
I'll sit here as long as you want, but I don't think it's very fair to not let me respond. But
Mr. Pallone, you have a chance.
You have the time. Proceed.
Thank you.
What I have is the question. And the question is, why is it that folks don't believe that we in the great state of Georgia are capable of making our own decisions about what best serves us? This bill is minor. This isn't going to solve the problems my constituents have. This bill is going to perhaps help a few families. And I think that's great. I think too many families have been hurt already, and if we can help a few, that's better than helping none at all. But it's not once, and it's not twice, it's multiple times since you've been at the witness table that you've said that these policies are just being canceled just because it's the normal course of business. I thought Mr. Cole did a wonderful job pointing out up there apparently emergency press conferences going on at the White House, apparently emergency meetings between the Democratic caucus and the president trying to sort this thing out, to suggest that this is just the normal course of business, I think does a disservice to folks, because you and I both know it's not. We have a major upheaval in the American healthcare system today, and it's the result of folks, I think, trying to do what they thought was best for the American people in 2010. I disagree, but they thought that it was, and now we're having some awful consequences as a result of that. And if we can't even acknowledge that cancellations are happening because these plans were in fact outlawed, I don't know how we can find much more common ground, the common ground that Mr. Hastings was asking that we find. Don't you concede this is not a normal circumstance? These policies are being canceled in large part for one reason and one reason only, and that's because they don't meet the standards that the Affordable Care Act believes they should meet in order to be available for sale in the United States of America.
Are you yielding time?
I'd be happy to yield to my friend.
Okay, now.
Let me say, I listened carefully to everything you said, and I don't agree with anything at all you said, 100%, okay? First of all, I tried to explain that some of these policies are canceled just routinely because of the nature of the private competitive marketplace that's out there, okay? That's what we have. You can cancel the policy anytime you want. You don't even have to have a reason, from the way I understand it, okay? So some are canceled because the insurance companies just decide they're not going to sell insurance in the state at all, any insurance, okay? I don't know what percentage that is, but I'm sure it's a big percent, okay? Others are being canceled because they've decided that they can't continue to sell this policy because, as I said, it's bare bones and it's skeletal, or I call it a lousy policy, at the price that they were offering, or even at an increase with interest, which is allowed if you're going to grandfather, okay? So I guess what I'm trying to tell you is I think it's very nice that we have this bill. It's very nice that the president is doing what he's doing today. I'm not saying that it's not a great thing for everybody to get together and kumbaya and whatever you want to do. But the bottom line is that it's going to be increasingly the case that these policies will not be sold, regardless of what you do today, because now there is a health marketplace where, granted, we have said you have to provide good benefits, you can't have the skeletal policies anymore, and we're giving subsidies, and a lot of people, most people, in my opinion, will find that a better alternative. Understand, when I say misinformation, I've looked at these different letters. Some letters just say, you're canceled. They don't tell you we're offering you something else, or they don't tell you there's a health marketplace. Some say you can go to the health marketplace. But as you know, you can't for the most part because it's broken. The computer's broken. So part of the problem here is that we're stepping in with some solutions you think, or the president thinks, or Dr. Burgess thinks, that I think aren't solutions at all. The real solution is for that person who had the policy canceled to go on the healthcare marketplace and find a better policy for a lower cost. And ultimately, that's what's going to happen, and these policies will disappear.
Reclaiming my time, but wanting to focus on that, because you've said that several times, I don't understand why we can't get your support. What you're saying is that these policies are so bad and so undesirable to the American people that left to their own devices, the American people would choose something else instead. Why won't you join with me then?
They will.
To give people the freedom of choice, because you're absolutely certain these policies are going to go away on their own. Why can't my family keep it today if that's what my community families want?
Because my concern is that with the Upton bill, okay, you not only do what the president suggested or is going to do with the executive order, but you're going to actually encourage people to be able to buy these policies that don't even have them now, all right?
Absolutely.
And yes, I am concerned that people will be confused and may opt for them. I am concerned about that. I admit that. I am concerned. And part of it is because I know how difficult it is for people to find and understand the different policies that are out there. It's not easy. And that's the reason why we've stepped in and said you can't sell these lousy policies if you're not grandfathered. Because we think that people may buy them not understanding what they're getting. I mean, you have people have come to my office and said, I have a health care policy that doesn't cover hospitalization. They're shocked. I didn't even know you could buy a policy that didn't have hospitalization. Did you know that you could buy a policy that didn't cover hospitalization?
I did know that.
But that's pretty sad, in my opinion. You may think it's a good thing because the person chose it and we have freedom. But, you know, freedom to do something that is not helpful to you because you don't know it is not necessarily great, in my opinion.
I tell folks back home at town hall meetings, Mr. Pallone, that the toughest thing about getting a voting card in Congress is I thought it was all just political games here. And what I found out is that folks who disagree with me actually genuinely have a heartfelt view on the other side of the aisle, that I genuinely believe the best way to serve my constituents is to allow them to make the decision about what's best for their family. And you are genuinely concerned that if left to their own devices, my constituents are going to get it wrong. And
They
only
have.
if we
I've
help
had people
them, will
literally
they
come to
succeed.
me and say, I thought my policy covered hospitalization. I thought my policy covered this, and it didn't. I mean, look at some of these things. The fine print, the inability, it's, you know, you got to be I think even very educated, intelligent people many times cannot decipher.
When Mr. McGovern was here earlier, he talked about this being a major piece of legislation. He talked about openness in the process, and candidly, I agree with absolutely everything that has been said about regular order. I appreciate what Mr. Hastings read. That was one of my best moments in my 3 years in Congress when that speech was being made on the House floor, and I believe that the Speaker genuinely believes that openness leads to better outcomes. But as Mr. McGovern called this a major piece of legislation, we were talking about the hearings that were going on, it dawned on me that I'm reading this Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services memo that tries to do virtually the exact same thing that Mr. McGovern is calling a major piece of legislation. It's trying to do it without coming to Congress in any way whatsoever on its own. I heard what Dr. Burgess said about legal authority and wanting to get things done. Let me ask you, just as a House member, Mr. Pallone, I am very disappointed that Republican Congresses, I think, give a pass to Republican presidents on articles of on matters of constitutional importance. I'm very disappointed that Democratic Congresses, I believe, give passes to Democratic presidents on matters of constitutional importance. It seems to me that if we can agree that there are problems with the Affordable Care Act, and apparently the president believes that there are, because again, he's not only signed legislation to that effect, but he's done much more administratively than he's done legislatively. It seems like we owe it to folks, not just to this president, not just to these constituents, but for presidents and constituents 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. If this is a matter of such great import, don't we owe it to folks back home, whether we choose to do it or whether we choose not to do it, but to preserve that decision-making authority, not just in the House, but here on Capitol Hill with people's representatives on the Senate side and the House side? Have you genuinely been untroubled by all of the administrative edicts on changing how the Affordable Care Act would be implemented, since those things probably should have been here with us in Congress instead?
I'm not trying to avoid your question. My biggest concern has been the fact that this so much emphasis was put on this website, healthcare.gov, that people felt that they had to go there in order to sign up, and that it was broken and it hasn't been fixed yet. That's my biggest concern, and I think that's what most Democrats are worried about, that this needs to be fixed, and that people should find other means, whether they call an 800 number or go to see somebody, an insurance agent, to sign up. I mean, that's my biggest concern. The president is free to do whatever he wants to make exceptions, and, I may like or not like some of them, to be perfectly honest. But I guess I'm just really making the plea that we not make a fix with something that's going to make it worse. And that's without repeating, that's my concern about the Upton bill.
Dr. Burgess?
The short answer to the question that you originally posed. I mean, the Upton bill before us is first aid. You've got a patient in the operating table in the emergency room who's hemorrhaging badly. You just want to stop the bleeding at this point. We're hemorrhaging policies. People are losing their coverage. They're asking for help. They're asking for relief. Now, the Upton bill is an attempt to do that legislatively. The president, when he talked today, he talked, of course, first about the problems with the website. I agree with him. They've got to be fixed. I think at some point they will be fixed enough for them to claim that they are fixed. And he said the other problem that has received a lot of attention concerns Americans who've received letters from their insurers that they may be losing the plans that they bought in the old individual market, often because those plans no longer meet the law's requirements to cover the basic benefits. Now, continuing to quote the president, now, as I indicated earlier, I completely get how upsetting this can be for a lot of Americans, particularly after assurances that they heard from me, the president, that if they had a plan that they liked, they could keep it. And to those Americans, I hear you loud and clear. I said that I would do everything we can to fix the problem, and today I'm offering an idea that will help you do it. And he goes on to talk about the grandfather plans in the Affordable Care Act that predate the Affordable Care Act. Quoting again, that's what's called a grandfather clause that was included in the law. Today, we are going to extend that principle both to people whose plans have changed since the law took effect and to people who bought plans since the law took effect. My contention is I don't think the president has the authority to do that. He signed a law that said that these plans were no longer going to be available to people after date certain. I think that it is incumbent on the legislature. If someone needs to stop the bleeding, it's Congress that's going to have to step in and stop the bleeding.
Mr. Woodall,
back the time.
Would you yield briefly?
I'd be happy to yield.
Yeah, I just want to show you how all of this stuff is evolving. And I just criticize and will continue to criticize my governor for not expanding Medicaid. But just to show you how some things change, and it's a good segue from what Dr. Burgess just got through saying. The Florida Office of Insurance Regulation, well, this is as of 5/30, will allow insurers to extend cancel policies in 2014. Most plans have already offered, Commissioner Kevin McCarthy said, and the office pledges to work with any company that chooses to continue coverage in accordance with the president's transitional policy. Florida Blue announced that it would rescind its cancellation notices. Affected members, this is quoting Florida Blue, will receive new letters from Florida Blue informing them that they can continue to utilize their existing plan through 2014. The decision applies to the individual market. The carrier is considering its options in the small group market, according to the release. Florida Blue had canceled the policies of 300,000 people. So just in that period, and there are going to be other fixes like that won't have anything to do with all of this mumbo-jumbo that we're going around.
Well, I'm very happy to yield. Reclaiming my time, what I would say to the gentleman is that's not a fix. Look at what you just read. 300,000 people lost their insurance, and what you just read is because the president came out this afternoon and directed insurance commissioners across the country that they could have one more year to do this. Now those same 300,000 people won't lose their insurance until next year. They're still going to lose their insurance. We didn't change the law to make these policies available. Be happy to yield to my friend.
No, you see, that isn't. This goes back to Mr. Pallone's point. That won't be the case a year from now, and I promise you that. What will happen between now and that time is the marketplace will be up. Even though Florida isn't in the exchange, the marketplace will be up, and those same people will be able to see for themselves, that same 300,000 people, and they'll be able to get insurance, and many of them for less, and some of them with subsidies.
The reading from the letter that CMS sent out to insurance commissioners, no doubt the one your Florida insurance commissioner got, it said that in many cases, even with the federal subsidies, that policyholders are finding out that such coverage would be more expensive than their current coverage, and they're dissuaded from transitioning to such coverage. It's not advantageous for some folks, and for others it is. I would say to my friend, thinking about how we can work together, if we move tomorrow to make Obamacare voluntary, that if you wanted it and needed it, you could avail yourself of every single benefit it had to offer. But if you didn't believe in what it was doing, if you had moral objections to it, if you had financial problems complying with it, if you liked what you had already and you want to keep it, do that. If you made it voluntary tomorrow, I promise you, you would never hear another word from me about it. It's the compulsory nature of it that I find so troubling. Mr. Pallone said, absolutely accurately, and I want to make sure, because you got it accurately, I wanted to have it. You said, I don't want to give anyone the impression that these policies will continue. You're absolutely right. Whether it's the marketplace that allows them to be discontinued, or whether it's the fact that neither the President's solution nor the House solution today allows those policies to be sold past the end of next year, I don't want to give anyone the impression that what we're doing today solves any of the problem. I'll quote from July 2009, President Barack Obama, "If you like your doctor, you will be able to keep your doctor, period. If you like your health care plan, you will be able to keep your health care plan, period. No one will take it away, no matter what." I say to you, Mr. Chairman, the fix that the President and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services offer today does not fulfill that promise. And the solution that we have before us in the Rules Committee today does not fulfill that promise. We can try to stem the bleeding where we can, but there is not yet a solution before this body or before this nation that allows us to make good on the President's promise, and I think that we should. With that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman very much, and would now defer to the gentleman from Florida, the gentleman, Mr. Nugent. The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, you know, in almost 3 years now that I've sat here, I hear a lot of rhetoric, sometimes amazing rhetoric, that really conflicts with just so many things that I believe in, I guess. But, you know, back in the district, I've met with cancer facilities that provide cancer treatment to broad folks. In one particular area in the city that I was at, they're concerned that the fact that whether it's the bronze plan or the silver plan, the high deductibles that are attached to it, that their patients won't even be able, they don't have the means to meet that high deductible. They don't have the ability to meet the high deductible plan. So you talk about bait and switch. When you sell somebody insurance and you say this is going to take care of you, and then in fact the high deductible, let me tell you something, high deductible to me is over $2,000. So when you're talking $6,000, $8,000, some of them are higher than that. You've just taken, I guess, the affordability of health care, and you're going to crush these people in the same way that you're doing it today. So I don't know what we accomplished by that. These physicians are scared to death that they're going to have a difficult time in treating folks, and they're going to wind up in the hospital where it cost even more to treat than they could have received that same treatment within one of the facilities that's freestanding away from the hospital, because the reimbursement rate to the hospital is higher than they get, which providing the same level of care, but it is higher reimbursement. And guess what? That's where they're going to wind up going, is to the hospital. And it's going to cost us more money. So when you hear members say that, yeah, the taxpayer is going to pay. No, the taxpayer is going to pay because that's where they're going to wind up, because they're not going to have the ability to meet the deductible needs for these organizations. Mr. Pallone, you talked about all the canceled policies, and we've heard all of the discussion about some of these are naturally occurring, which I don't disagree, but you obviously don't have the mass of cancellations. We've never seen anything like this before. Have we ever seen the mass cancellations that we've seen up to this point? Have we ever seen that? Yes.
In my experience.
Well, either one of, both of you.
I can't give you the numbers. I mean, look, as I said, and I don't want to keep repeating the same thing, the reasons for the cancellation are varied.
And I agree. But
I mean,
have we ever seen,
but
and I understand you're saying that, but have we ever seen in history the number of cancellations at a given time that reached the magnitude that we have today?
But I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Well,
but I would say
okay answer if you say I don't know.
Well, I don't, because I haven't gotten the compilation of it. But what I guess I'm trying to point out to you that is, I don't think the fact that that they get a cancellation notice is as significant as whether or not they can find a policy that's better for a lower
that's my
price.
second thing, and you said then go to the exchange. The problem is, and you've said it yourself, the exchange in and of itself is broken, so they have nowhere to go.
Well, they do. I mean, look, I don't want to get into that. They can.
But,
there's various ways to go.
You said that, and I'm just repeating.
Well, because I don't think people should rely so much on the website. I think they could go to 800 number, go to insurance agents, various ways.
But if they go to 800 number, don't they still have to input that into the website?
They don't personally.
Well, somebody does.
Somebody does, right? Correct. But the only thing I'm trying to say is that you're putting all the emphasis on the cancellation notice. I think what's really key is when I get a cancellation notice, do I have an alternative, either with that company or on the health exchange? That's what's the key. And yes, because we are transitioning
but
from
see, this I guess goes to the core of it, and you've heard this so many times. The president has repeated it so many times. He's apologized for what he said, or the way he said it, because nobody saw the asterisk after the period. Nobody saw the asterisk after the period, so that's why he had to apologize. End of the day, it is important to people that have their insurance canceled. It may not, you can come up with all kinds of things, well, they can do this or they can do that. But if I have insurance, do you get that part? Is that they didn't want to lose their insurance?
I don't get that part because I think people routinely...
Because they're not broad enough to understand it themselves.
Because in the individual market, people often get cancellation notice. It's a question of where you go.
Let's get past that. I mean, you keep going back to that, but this is unique. And Dr. Burgess, maybe you want to answer. Maybe you haven't answered. Has this ever happened where you've had mass cancellations like this?
Certainly not in my experience. I think Mr. Woodall is exactly right. What we're doing today is not going to solve the problem. We're trying to stop the bleeding. Look, there's going to be other problems right around the corner. We're not dealing with any of those today. The access problems, they're going to happen when patients show up at the hospital or the doctor's office with an insurance card that they think provides them coverage, but they don't understand what a $6,000 deductible means and that they're going to have to write a big check, or they stop paying for their policy after the first 2 weeks, but they can't be dropped for 3 months. Someone is going to eat that charge somewhere along the way. So we will see those access problems. That will likely be the next wave of difficulties that we have to contend with. We're not solving the problems inherent to the Affordable Care Act today. We're trying to stop the hemorrhaging from all of these cancellations that you...
And see, that's one of the problems I have with this piece of legislation is the fact that we're not fixing a thing. I mean, we're doing a short-term fix for people, hopefully, that won't lose their insurance. And I'm glad to hear, what my colleague from Florida said about Florida Blue. That's great. But at the end of the day, in the end of 2014, or whenever this expires, the edict from the president expires, they're going to lose their insurance. I mean, as sure as anything, they're going to lose it. Now, maybe the website will be up and running by then, and, maybe pigs will fly. I don't know. But they're still going to lose their insurance that I guess most of them like. Is that true?
If you wanted me to predict the future for a year from now, I think the cost of the renewal policies that people will begin to see in September are going to be so astonishingly high. That will be the next large-scale reduction in insurance policy where people will say, I just simply cannot afford the cost for a $6,000 deductible policy.
And I've heard from, actually, an insurance agent, they don't sell health insurance, they sell all kinds of other insurance, and he said, he's being canceled, and he found out what the rate would be under the Affordable Care Act. He's going to pay more for his family coverage for he and his wife. He's going to pay more, and his deductible is going to be 3 times higher than what it is today. So how is that a good deal?
It ain't.
Never will be.
Never was, never will be.
Dr. Burgess, I know you got to be a real bright guy to be a physician. I wasn't. I was only, a cop. But you wrote a letter where I think you identified this problem early on, and I heard other members say that the president didn't know. he doesn't seem to know much about a lot of things that go on, but you seem to identify the problem that there was going to be cancellations, a lot of cancellations. Is that true?
Yes. The letter was dated May of 2010.
Are you an actuary?
No, as a consequence of, at the time, being the ranking member on the Oversight Subcommittee on Energy and Commerce, we had received a lot of data from, and actually this was not in the individual market, this was in the large group market, companies that would be fined if they did not provide coverage or if their employees sought subsidies in the exchange. The amount of the fine was significant, but it was still way less than the cost of the coverage. So people did the quick calculation and found that if they were a particularly large company, they might save millions, if not billions of dollars by simply paying the fine. And that shift from people from employer coverage then to the exchange coverage would be large and dramatic.
Do you believe that no one in the administration, I'm not saying the president knew, but no one in the administration thought that this could be a reality, that this could happen?
It would be wrong for me to project. I mean, I don't get consulted by the administration. They don't ask for my advice and counsel, and they've not thought it.
But you saw it.
Provided it.
But you saw it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Everyone who was in this Congress saw it. Everyone who was in this hearing room the night we marked up this thing had to have been able to see that.
So I guess what amazes me is that those that crafted this, that pushed this through, obviously at the president's behest. I mean, he wanted this. It's his signature legislation. I get it. I understand it. I think it's admirable that he and those that were in power at that time wanted to do what they thought was the right thing. But you know, you hear all the stuff about adverse consequences, but this is one that you should have identified, or at least you did.
I think so. Now, I was here as were many people on the dais. We did town halls in the summer of 2009, August of 2009. They were some of the roughest town halls I've ever been in. I mean, normally I'd get 24 people in Denton, Texas on a Saturday morning in August. I got 2,000 people show up. They were all mad about, at that point, what was still a committee product. But what were people telling us during those town halls? Two things. First off, don't destroy the system that is arguably working for 2/3 of the country. The second thing was, if you're going to do anything at all, could you please help us with costs? Well, I just ask you, how's it looking today? It looks like we're going to destroy the system for everyone in order to fix some problems in the individual and small group market, and costs are going to go through the roof. Again, I submit by September of 2014, when the insurance companies are having to price the risk for carrying policies where there wasn't the sign-up by the demographic that the administration assured them that would sign up if there was an individual mandate, those costs now are going to have to be distributed for a smaller population that is inherently a higher utilizer of medical services, people with chronic diseases, the ones who will spend the time on the website getting through so that they can sign up because they know they got real problems. The other guys have gone fishing. The low-risk folks are going to give up. But that cost is going to be staggering. So what have we done? We destroyed the system as it was working with all the faults that it had. The large group market didn't have problems with pre-existing conditions. Some of the lifetime limits, but for the most part, you just never heard that happening. I practiced for 25 years. I think I got 2 notices from bankruptcy court not to proceed with any debt collection. Not that I was doing so, but that 2 patients had had their obligations discharged in bankruptcy. 2 over 25 years. I mean, this was not a problem that encountered a couple of times a week or a couple of times a month. 2 over a quarter century. Yes, people who get into trouble financially sometimes will have medical obligations, and those can be discharged in a bankruptcy court, but that was not the reason they filed bankruptcy. It was their credit card debt. It was something else that pushed them in, or some other life event that pushed that to require that to happen. It wasn't my charge for delivering a baby or doing a surgery. But look, everyone knew when this thing went down in 2009 what lay just ahead. But people chose to ignore and to some degree, magical thinking. And I don't mean to be critical, but I think it was magical thinking down at the White House that they could just simply make this work. September of 2009, after the summer town halls, the president came and addressed a joint session of Congress. You may recall it was a kind of famous night because he and a gentleman from South Carolina got into a little bit of a floor debate that some people felt was inappropriate. But the president said during that speech that if you lie about my plan, if you misrepresent my plan, I'll call you out. But who's been the one that's been consistently misrepresenting? Well, it's actually been the White House. You know, it's time to call it what it is.
It almost feels like there's been a fraud perpetrated on us in regards to the comments that were made about just what we've talked about, what the president has said, and what the president's apologized for, and obviously because of the actions he took today, unilaterally. It just, to me, it's a harsh word, but it's really smacks to me is it's just been a fraud perpetrated on us in regards to all the things that have been said. It's kind of like a bait and switch.
Look, in medicine, we all recognize there's two kinds of doctors. There's doctors who think a lot and doctors who do a lot. They generally do not reside in the same body. But this was one of those efforts that was brought by the thinking side, not the doing side. Had they consulted with doctors who were active in practice, had they consulted with hospital administrators who had to make things work, had they consulted with insurance executives who had to make things work, the product may have been vastly different. But this was a product of think tanks. This was a product of people who have some high-minded ideas, but very little practical experience. And again, I think we're living with that now.
Like I said earlier, I'm perplexed in regards to whether or not I even want to support this because first of all, I don't think the president has the authority to do what he's doing. I think every time you do an executive order on a piece of legislation and judge, I don't know how you would sit there and be able to judge something when you have the law in front of you, but you have 30 other things there that preempt the law because of an executive order. I just think that that gets so messy and unwieldy. I don't know how you ever figure out what the original was.
Correct, and there's no stability going forward. So if we simply say the president has done an executive order, Congress doesn't have to do a thing, there is nothing to say that the president may not feel differently 2 weeks from now.
Of course.
Perhaps if public opinion has changed once again. But the Congress does have an obligation to fix problems. This is not going to fix the problems in the Affordable Care Act. This is going to solve a very specific problem, which is more people losing their coverage than people who are able to sign up. And in stemming that hemorrhage, it is, I think, appropriate for Congress to provide that first aid. But it is first aid. It is not solving any problem. And I think that needs to be emphasized at this hearing today. The solution to the problem would look vastly different than what we're working on today and would require a great deal more effort than the one-page bill that Mr. Woodall had held up today. I mean, you've got drafting errors, you've got errors throughout this thing because of the way it came to us. You weren't here then, but the Senate passed a bill on Christmas Eve. They always thought they'd go to a conference committee with the House and Henry Waxman and Max Baucus would kind of figure things out, but they didn't go to a conference committee because they lost the Senate election. They didn't have 60 votes. Stop and think for a minute. Lyndon Johnson, would he have not passed the Civil Rights Act in 1958 if he lacked a single vote when he was majority leader in the Senate? Later on, when he was president, if he was on the precipice of passing Medicare, would he have stopped because, oh, I don't have 60 votes, I'll have to go tell the seniors they won't get Medicare? No, he would have gotten that 60th vote. He'd have moved heaven and earth to get that 60th vote. He wouldn't have said, well, go forward with an inferior product because it's really the best we can do, and we'll just fill in at a later date with some filler. And this is the result of that. It was an imperfect product that was visited upon this body, and again, I swear it must have been an accident. It was never intended to be signed into law. The dog ate my homework, so I turned in the rough draft. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on so long. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
He's glaring at me.
Person today and during the period of time this year has had an opportunity. And so I thank the gentleman very much. The gentleman from Orlando, Florida, the gentleman, Mr. Webster, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. About 3 weeks ago, on one of the major news networks, there was a lady interviewed that lives in my district down in Polk County, and she had gotten a notice from Blue Cross, which is Florida Blue now, that her policy, which she chose, and she went through details of saying, I bought this policy full well knowing that there were richer plans out there, but I could afford this one. That's what I want. So it was this individual policy. I think she was 58 years old. She paid about under $60 a month. She got a renewal notice, or not a renewal, a cancellation of that policy, saying that from Florida Blue that policy was inferior to what was necessary, and it lacked some of the 10 provisions that every policy needed to have under the Affordable Care Act. To buy a new policy, which was very similar to other prices that I have seen for a person that age, was going to be about $580 per month. She could not afford that. She wanted the policy she had. She didn't buy a richer plan. It wasn't some failed choice that she made. She did it willingly. 2 weeks ago, on a Wednesday, I called my wife. She was at Chick-fil-A in Winter Garden. And there was a lady next to her and said, "Are you talking to your husband?" And she said, "Yes." She said, "Well, tell him I got a cancellation from this Florida Blue. Her husband is on Medicare. He's older. She is, I believe, 63, I believe. And so she had an individual policy, and her policy was a little over $60 a month. They told her the exact same thing. Your policy is being canceled because it lacks some of the 10 provisions necessary in order to have a legitimate policy under the Affordable Care Act. Your new policy is going to cost $600. Now, we're talking about 10 times the cost, 1,000% more for both of those individuals. 2 different places, 2 different times, but the same letter. Now, Florida Blue announced today that they were going to reinstate. Those policies were not canceled for anything other than the Affordable Care Act mandated that all health policy provide 10 categories of essential health benefits. Because some of those plans offered did not include those benefits, we were no longer able, and members were notified that they were being transitioned to new plans that complied with ACA requirements. That's what Florida Blue said. Because of the letter or whatever it was that the President sent out, they are reinstating, not for other reasons, for one reason, is because those are being waived, and so now all 300,000 that were canceled are going to be renewed. And they say that. So they're going to be offered any other choice they might have, but they are going to be able to get that policy. Those 2 ladies are going to get their policy because of what happened. They weren't canceled for some other reason that have been mentioned here, which none of have been articulated of what the reasons were. These were canceled for one reason, Affordable Care Act. And now they're being reinstated. For what reason? The Affordable Care Act is being changed. So I guess the question is, our insurance commissioner, accepted what was allowed for under this document that we have here. However, state of Arkansas, state of Washington, other states have said, no, we're not going to do it. My question to Dr. Burgess is, your legislation would first of all codify what this says and a little more. Wouldn't it allow those states If there were insurance companies in those states, they would be allowed to offer that product. Is that correct?
It would not require that an insurance company sell such a product, but it would allow the purchase of said product that the insurance company.
Well, we already see, yes, that there are willing sellers. Matter of fact, they even say, look, these are our clients. These are our customers. We want to keep them as customers. We're not trying to get people off of our policies and send them out there and cancel for any other reason other than that. But there are now going to be states under this, if we just keep this, there are going to be states that aren't going to be allowed to do that. You're not going to be able to keep it because there is either the uncertainty, and maybe the insurance commissioner is afraid, like you are, that it might go away the next day or something. I don't know what the reasons are. But the point is, if we were to pass this, the opportunity for companies like Florida Blue in other states could offer that same policy, and people like those two ladies who are getting 1,000% increase in their rates would be able to purchase that at least for 1 year.
For 1 year. And they'd have the certainty that it would not change upon the presidential whim during that time.
Well, then I think it shows a need. Does this repair everything? No.
No.
It's not. I don't guess it's.
If I ran the zoo, if I may, if I ran the zoo, I'd say that those people in Arkansas ought to be able to buy in Florida across state lines.
Yeah.
We are not covering that today. I wish we were, because I've got people in my district office who are now having to buy in the D.C. exchange. Sounds like buying across the state line to me, but we are not addressing that issue today. This is a very narrow focus to simply stop a problem that was affecting, obviously, your citizens of my state as well.
Well, and I appreciate that answer, because 3,571 people have signed up in Florida for on the exchange. Here were 300,000 people that were not going to have coverage, that were already sort of included as insured. So they weren't part of the millions that were going to be the new. These were part of the old, and they were going to drop off. There are going to be other states who are not going to take this that are going to have that same problem. And my question, I guess my last question would be just this. Aren't there, I mean, you've got that, you've got your Affordable Care Act handbook, and it looks like, I would hope my Bible would look that red, because it's pretty awesome that you've read through that. And here's my question. Aren't there things coupled together that make assumptions that people in general are going to be covered and now are not? In that, you've mentioned one, that was the corporate mandate. You mentioned others. There's also the fact that we've eliminated the cap on out-of-pocket expenses that was in that particular, and so people are maybe buying policies that don't even cover things.
That was a presidential directive.
Right, I understand that. I'm just saying you mentioned things that have been set aside by one way or another. 7 were repealed, others have been set aside or delayed. But aren't there things coupled in this bill that depend on everybody being covered, like the low-income pool, DISH, to the disproportionate share to hospitals, other things that are going to fade away, and still there are going to be people, a lot of people, that potentially aren't going to be covered, even though it assumes, and you would say, okay, if you don't need a low-income pool if everybody's going to have insurance, but that may not be the case. And the insurance they have may not cover a whole lot. Doesn't that put extra pressure? That's my question. Doesn't it put extra pressure on the system?
Yeah, it's the basic house of cards question, and how many cards can you remove from the bottom layer before the whole thing tumbles down? It's a valid question. I don't have an answer for you. In the risk pools, but we've seen how poorly that was constructed. For the first time, there was a federally directed pre-existing conditions pool that was going to run at the federal level, was funded with $5 billion. It finally got up and running in the summer of 2010. It closed for new applicants February 1st of 2013. In other words, it ran for about 2 years' time. They spent a lot of money on the administrative side of setting up a new federal agency, very little money on actually taking care of people. You had to be uninsured for 6 months in order to get considered by the program. You had people who a year ago began to start that 6-month journey to get coverage under the pre-existing pool. When they showed up at the pay window, they were told, sorry, we're closed for new applicants. So all year you have had people who, and nobody writes about this or talks about this anymore. And this is one of the main reasons this was pushed, was you've got to take care of people with pre-existing conditions. All of those people that were expecting to age into the federal PSIP program have been cut off since February 1st. Now they're waiting for January 1st unless this thing doesn't work. And some of our states are now trying to put in place, scrambling to put in place, what do we do to provide for those state risk pools? What do we do to provide for continuous coverage? I don't know what will happen to people in the federal risk pool if this thing is not ready to go January 1st. That is something we will have to deal with legislatively. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. I yield back.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and understanding that I am the only obstacle standing between you and a plate of food for dinner. I will keep my remarks brief.
The chairman yielded his time earlier, and so the chairman will reserve that time.
It's his fault. It's his fault. So,
Gentlewoman's recognized.
Thank you. And Doc, I'm going to finish with asking you this question, but I'll give it to you now, Dr. Burgess, so that you can think about it. If we were to enact meaningful medical malpractice reform as a medical doctor, would you say that that could very well result in meaningful health care costs going down? And I'll end with that, but in a second. Every day, it seems like we're waiting for the next Obamacare shoe to drop. Every day is a surprise. Millions of Americans have already lost their health care because a president said that their plan was not good enough. He said, if you like your health care plan, you can keep it. He didn't say, if I, President Obama, don't like your health care plan, then you have to change it. But with a non-functioning website, it looks like pretty soon Obamacare can't offer them anything either. Now the president is understandably desperate to fix this mess. Today we heard that the president's latest fix is to use his enforcement discretion, another executive branch fix to bypass Congress. But the problem with Obamacare, as we know, is not just the website, it's the whole law, and you have it right there, almost 3,000 pages. The truth is that President Obama said his health care plan would create jobs and reduce unemployment. It didn't. He said that it would lower cost. It hasn't. He said you could keep your doctor. You can't. The Obamacare train wreck has proven to be a series of empty promises that is dragging down our economy and hurting America's families. So what has happened? Millions of folks have gotten cancellation notices. Premiums have gone up. Workers are being shortened with their hours. Few have been able to sign up for Obamacare, and were that the only problem, you could fix that website. But what about real reforms like medical malpractice reform? In your experience as a medical doctor, is that a change that we could make that could truly bring down health care costs for all American families?
My opinion is that it would, but it will take time. And you know, your state and my state are in very different places. 10 years ago this year, Texas passed a cap on non-economic damages in medical liability cases, which has resulted in more doctors being available. Every county but 2 in Texas now have an OB doctor, now have an emergency room doctor. This was not the case 10 years ago. So it certainly has improved access. I know, talking to the doctors in your state, they are desperate for some type of solution. They look to us nationally for that solution because of the difficulties with getting things done at the state level. Certainly there are people who have 10th Amendment concerns about doing something nationally. But here's something we could do. And again, one of the missed opportunities, if you're going to reform health care from top to bottom, Dr. Mark McClellan, who's now at the Brookings Institute, but back in 1996 when he was at Stanford, did a study that suggested there was about $30 billion of excess cost to the Medicare system in cardiac diagnoses every year because of the practice of defensive medicine. If those could somehow be walked back, that $30 billion in savings for a year would be extrapolated $300 billion over 10 years. If you provided a no-fault type of insurance within, you can't just simply mandate that across the country because states play a role in this. But Medicare is a federal program. We've already trampled on the 10th Amendment with Medicare many times, and it's not really bothered anybody. Could you construct a system within that federal Medicare program that allowed for liability insurance to be covered by the Federal Tort Claims Act, for example, rather than buying that coverage in the open market? And it would be that type of arrangement that I think could be very important for bringing costs down. You know, again, unfortunately, when we had all this involved discussion about reforming health care, that was not included. Solving the Medicare payment issue was not included. Allowing doctors to discuss cost and price amongst themselves, that they're prohibited by the Federal Trade Commission from doing that right now. That was enough. You know, we ask our doctors to be our partners in this fast-moving world of health care, and we want costs to come down, but we won't let doctors talk to each other about price. How are they supposed to ever bring costs down if we won't permit that? So there are things that we could have done.
Things that we could do.
But on the federal level, but for whatever reason, we chose not to do those.
And just one last question. I assume that you're in touch with practicing doctors now and in touch with students and in their residency who are looking forward to being doctors. What fears have they expressed to you about this, the implications of this law upon their profession?
You know, the younger physician is focused on finishing their training, paying back their medical loans. The difficulties that we have up here, oftentimes off their radar screen. But I did bring it up today. I mean, it's not outside of our discussion with this problem that we're trying to solve today, but the access issues in January, February, March are going to be significant. That is going to affect doctors in their training programs, doctors getting out of their training programs. You know, and the sad thing is that the doctor of tomorrow is going to have the ability at their fingertips to alleviate human suffering that no generation of doctors has ever known, and we've made their work that much harder with what's been embodied in this healthcare law.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jill Ullman yields back her time, and thank you very much. Now my turn. Mr. Pallone and Dr. Burgess, thank you very much for being here. Mr. Pallone, why did the President make his announcement today?
I can't, speak for the President, but I don't think there's any question. It's been in response to the debate we've had over the last few years, or few weeks, I should say, over these canceled policies.
Were you consulted ahead of time about what the President was going to do, or did you provide any feedback to the President of the administration about what you believe the President should do in this regard?
I mean, there have been, in terms of what he was specifically going to do today, no. But I mean, I certainly have heard, as you have, that he was trying to respond to some of these concerns.
Do you believe it was wise that the United States Congress, U.S. House of Representatives, at the end of their 10 days of being home, that they responded also? Or do you think we should have been silent?
I was trying to make clear today my position, which is very different from yours, and that is that I really think that the cancellation of these policies is more in many cases, is a response to the fact that these insurance companies don't think ultimately they're going to be able to sell these policies, because the fact that you can go in the healthcare marketplace and get a policy with better benefits for a more affordable price. So I don't want to be disrespectful, because I know you didn't appreciate what I said before in that respect, and I'm not trying to.
Well, I don't know that I have ever.
I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think that a large part of this debate is not significant, because I think it's trying to address the fact that some people want to keep skeletal policies that are costing them too much, and I don't quite understand why we should be protecting people's ability to do that.
Okay, so the question was, should the United States Congress? So let me go back to the President. Why did the President do it? If you believe this, I know you don't.
Well, we don't necessarily agree on everything.
Oh, you don't agree with the President?
No, I'm not saying I don't agree with what he did today. I mean, I think that.
Well, my point is, Mr. Pallone, is if the President had something to say based upon a marketplace problem, why wouldn't the United States Congress, or at least House of Representatives, be allowed that same without being criticized. I didn't criticize the President of the United States. I think it was intuitively obvious to the most casual observer, Mr. President, you got a problem. We've been trying to tell him that for a long time. But why are you criticizing us for having a response or for even having, as the gentleman, Dr. Burgess said, an emergency meeting as a result of being home 10 days?
Because I think that the Chairman Upton's response is very dangerous.
Oh, you don't agree with it?
Not only don't I agree with it, but I think it has the potential of really upsetting the insurance market and causing a lot of people, and even new people that don't have these policies, to end up with skeletal policies at
what's the
prohibitive
practical
price.
effect of what the President did, as it had been talked about by the at least 3 gentlemen from Florida? Didn't the President allow these, as you call them, skeletal existing policies to be renewed?
He has, to some extent, not as much as the Upton bill, because the Upton bill allows people who don't have those policies to now buy them. And also the President had the safeguard that he insists that the insurance companies, when they offer to renew these policies, will have to tell people that there are alternatives that may be better and more affordable.
Mr. Pallone, do you understand in substance and have a clear understanding about what the President did today?
I think I do, but I think part of the problem here, and I know it's going to sound critical of all of you, is that I'm trying to look at this, at least in my mind, from a more practical point of view. And I think that many of you feel very strongly that if somebody chooses, and I think Mr. Woodhull said it best, that if someone chooses in the soundness of their mind to have a skeletal policy at a price that maybe is higher than they can find someone else, that's fine. That's their freedom. And, Ms. Fox said the same thing. They should have the freedom to do that. And I don't quite understand why you think that's important, to be honest.
Mr. Pallone, do you think that people should have their choice, or do you think it ought to be crammed down their throats by the law?
I think that we have a responsibility to be practical and try to give people the best policy at the best price, and not worry about whether or not people have the choice to choose the lousy one at the higher price.
All right, Mr. Pallone, you've stated here that you do understand what the President did in his announcement. Would members of Congress be allowed the same thing under the President's announcement? I'm going to the exchange. Are you?
We all have to go to the exchange.
I just asked the question. You are.
Oh,
so did the President allow us that chance to keep our policy if we chose to?
No, I don't understand what you're asking me.
Well, let me be real direct. The President today made an announcement that people could keep their insurance policy if they wanted. I'm a member of Congress. I've been told I have to go to the exchange. I said I was going to the exchange. You understand what the President said today? I want to be able to get, I want my flexibility and option too. May I make that decision too? Or, because you understand what the President did, I have not read the whole thing yet.
Well, I mean, the concern I would have is if we're allowed to stay in, I think what you're saying is that we would have the option of being able to stay in the federal
Did the President speak to me
program
today? Did the President talk to me and my family about my chance today to do as every other American did? Or was he only speaking to certain people?
Again, I'm trying to look at this practically. I don't think that we should have the option of staying in the federal program, if that's what you're asking me.
We shouldn't have the option?
Should not, no. I think we should have to go to the exchange.
The gentleman yield. I think Senator Grassley made sure that we didn't have that option.
Okay, well, that's not the point. The President has waved his hand up and said, hold on. I am making a decision. I'm not going to consult with Congress. I don't even know, I'm not sure he even alluded to whether he had the authority. He just said, if you want to stay in your health care plan, you can. Did that apply to members of Congress?
No, but we wrote the law, Mr. Chairman. The law says we can't stay in our
but so did the law say that these other people. Didn't the law say that these other people, as consistent with the plans, so they were knocking them off? I want to know, do I have that same chance? Was the President speaking to me? Did he intend that for me also?
All I can say is we're not allowed to stay in the federal employment system. We have to go to the exchange. And
so everybody else was they were told that they would have to leave their insurance too. I was told I had to leave my insurance. Yeah, and I was told what I'd have to do.
It was the
yes or no. Did Do you think the president's going to allow me to keep my insurance?
I don't know what you're trying to do. I mean,
yes, you do.
It was Mr. Grassley in the GOP.
No, sir. I'm talking about what the president did. You're now going to that law. The president arbitrarily today made an announcement down at the White House. Hey, everybody, I'm changing.
But you're the ones that keep saying that we should go to the exchange.
No, I didn't say that. The law said that, Mr. Plum.
No, I heard
and
it
the
on the
president
floor.
today waived the law.
Mr. Chairman,
just
I
as
heard
the
it
Attorney
many
General
times
does on a regular
floor.
basis. If they don't
Republicans
like the law,
standing up and saying that we should have to go to the exchange.
I'm just asking the question. Do you think that I fit under the president's statement today that said I can keep my insurance?
I got to think about this.
Good. That's why
you have a grandfathered. In other words, you want to be able to.
I didn't say I want to. I ask a question.
You want to know whether we should be able to keep our federal employees system insurance.
There are some 12,000 people up on the Hill who have been told, once again, jammed down our throat by this Affordable Care Act.
I don't think we should be able to keep.
I didn't say whether you thought. I asked what the president in the messaging that he gave today, did he allow federal employees and members of Congress the opportunity to keep their insurance also?
I don't think so.
No. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Pallone, you also believe that it's not really in the best interest of people to have the flexibility to make their own choice, that they should have to go no options. They'd have to take the plan that you chose, the president chose, the Affordable Care Act chose. Is that correct?
What I'm saying is that in order to have good plans that are affordable, okay?
Under your opinion and the president's.
Well, in order to have an insurance pool where they're going to be, where people are going to have good plans and affordable plans, you want to encourage people as much as possible to move into the health marketplace and not stay with, a skeletal plan that ultimately is not providing them with much coverage.
Okay. Dr. Burgess, it's my understanding after speaking to physicians back in Dallas, Texas, that many of these offers by the federal government would pay physicians in oncology, in cardiology, 80% of Medicaid reimbursement, and that many people viewed that that was not only unfair, but they could not sustain their practice. As a practicing physician, would you be a part of a plan that tried to lowball you or to take 80% of Medicaid?
We'd have to judge it within the context of what does it cost me to deliver the care to the patient? Can I afford the overhead costs that will be incurred by providing that care to the patient? And at the end of the day, am I going to be able to make a little money on the transaction, which is required? Physicians, for all their altruism, if they're required to work for free, it's a hard job, and they will find something else to do. At least that's been my experience. I think one of the big, and it's not part of our discussion today, but one of the biggest issues I have under the Affordable Care Act are the provisions of Section 1311, where under the guise of quality, physicians may be restricted access to the exchange because the Secretary of Health and Human Services will define quality, and her definition of quality may include, are you providing coverage for Medicare and Medicaid patients? And if you are not, you may not have access to the exchange. And no one has come out and said that. And I've tried to pin the Secretary down in multiple hearings on that, but the language is sufficiently ambiguous. We've all seen what has happened with the rulemaking process as it has occurred pertaining to this law, that I think there is enough concern in the physician community that people are paying attention to this. The big thing that I see on access is the fact that someone may have insurance coverage at the beginning of the year. They may lose it at some point for non-payment of premium, but the insurance company is not allowed to drop them for 90 days. And as you can imagine, at the tail out end of that 90 days, a cost or service is going to be questionable as to who the patient hasn't paid the premium, so the insurance company is going to say, I don't have to pay it. I don't have to pay the part that I'm obligated to. The physician or the hospital may very well end up holding the bag on that. When they see their days in accounts receivable begin to balloon up beyond 120 days, that is going to seriously affect the ability of physicians to maintain their practices because they can't support the cost of delivering the care. Now, if I were cynical, I might believe that that was an effort to drive physicians out of individual practice arrangements into a hospital arrangement or into some other arrangement. My dad was a doctor. His dad was a doctor. Our contract was always with the patient. I'm nothing against a doctor who works for the hospital, but you're working for the hospital, so your attention is going to be toward your employer because you want them to keep you employed. Our contract, I always felt, should be with the patient. We're the advocates for the patient. In a world where the doctor is no longer the advocate for the patient, it is a very different world than what Americans are used to in their health care. And that is one of the fundamental changes I think this thing is going to bring about, and one of the reasons I've been so desperately opposed to it for so long. And make no mistake, what we're doing today does not fix any of those problems. We are simply stemming the hemorrhage of the people who are losing their coverage. But there's a host of things within this that need our attention.
Dr. Burgess, thank you very much. It's my understanding that the reason why we're here today is directly related to the feedback that Americans are provided, and that's exactly why the President of the United States felt compelled to come and offer relief from the rules and regulations and the law. I believe that what the conversations that I've had with you and that others have had is that we believe that the way to do that is by working legislatively so that the President could see that. I've not heard, perhaps we'll have what might be called a SAP, a Statement of Administrative Policy. I've not seen that.
Generally, we get that at this point in the hearing, if I recall.
Generally, it does appear about now. But I think that what you have done is provided expert testimony that really every single member of Congress has realized, and that is we cannot sit back and not offer some relief to the American people. We've heard a lot. This may not be a perfect bill. No bill may be perfect, but the intent is very clear, and that is we see the distress among families, people back home who are hugely concerned and are spending excessive amount of time on this issue rather than paying attention to the other things like business, like their families. And there's great consternation. Once again, Dallas, Texas, Garland, Texas, Richardson, Texas, no different than I'm sure in Denton County, Texas. And so I think every member of this body came. I'm quite proud of our Republican leadership for not sitting back and waiting. I am proud of our leadership for saying we heard something and we're going to engage this administration and the United States Senate on behalf of the American people. So I want to thank you for taking the slings and arrows that you did today. I think you did a great job. Quite honestly, I'm proud of you for being on this committee also, and I know you wish you had been over there to ask the gentleman questions, but I thought that both of you served with honor and distinction today. Well, Mike,
may I recognize
Mike
myself?
would love, I'm sure Mike would love to do that, but both of you have taken time, most assuredly, to come and represent the thoughts. Both of you have been highly engaged in this, probably more than all but several other members, maybe the most of any people of this body, and I want to thank you for answering the call, coming here, and taking, it's kind of like murderer's row sometimes, but I know that both of you have done that with the very best of intent. And I want to thank both of you for your time today, and you're now excused with the gentleman, Dr. Burgess, assuming his role once again on the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I would request to be able to speak out of order for just a moment.
Gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I am concerned about one other thing that Mr. Pallone said, and I have to respond to that, and then I want to clarify something I said earlier. I believe Mr. Pallone said he doesn't understand why we think freedom is important. And, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, to me, there is nothing that epitomizes the difference in approaches to this country than that statement, that our colleagues on the other side of the aisle do not understand why we believe freedom is important. And I hope the American people will explain that, particularly next year. I think the American people have been telling us, as you have said, the feedback is coming. They don't like the taking away of their freedom, and that's part of the feedback. But now I want to...
Could the gentlelady yield?
The gentleman, hold on just one moment.
Thank you.
Does the gentlewoman wish to yield to the gentleman?
Not quite yet. I'd like to finish my comment. I too want to thank Dr. Burgess for today. I think he has done an absolutely marvelous job informing the American people about this very bad legislation. I just admire him so much for being here today. Now I would like to say I regret that when Mrs. Slaughter asked me a question earlier, I was on my way to another meeting, and I apologize I was not able to respond adequately. But to be clear about what I said, I believe this fiasco has undermined the credibility of the President and the Democrat Party. It has. I know the gentlewoman to be a person of integrity, but I believe that the Democrat Party made promises and broke them, and that's just a fact. And to bolster what I said, I would like to enter into the record several articles. An article from NBC News, Obama, repairing damaged credibility is on me. Another article from Roll Call, Obama tries to win back some credibility. Another article from the Wall Street Journal, Obama's credibility is melting. USA Today, Obamacare credibility going up in smoke. And then another article from the Washington Post. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't believe I'm the only person who believes that that is the case, and I'd ask permission to put those
Without
articles.
objection, those will be entered into the record.
Thank you. And now I yield back, and I'm sure that if Mr. McGovern wants to make a comment, you would.
Mr. Chairman.
If we will hold just a moment, please. I note that the gentleman, Mr. Plone, who was being spoken of, and to, has not left, and I would yield to the gentleman.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized.
I just want the gentlewoman, to understand where I'm coming from. What I'm said and what I will repeat is that I don't think that the freedom to choose a lousy policy at an unaffordable price or at a price that's less than I can get something better on the marketplace for less is something that we need to safeguard. In other words, I think this goes back to what Mr. Woodhull said today. I think he was very clear in saying that if I mistakenly, as an individual, decide that I want, a bare bones policy or skeletal policy, and it costs me a certain amount, and I have the ability to find another policy that, covers a lot more and is much more protective, but I think that I should be able to choose the bare bone one, even if it isn't comparable in price, that I should have that freedom. And I just don't think that type of freedom is important. That's all I was saying. Obviously, we have to have, we have a competitive marketplace. We have a free marketplace for the most part under the Affordable Care Act, a very competitive capitalist marketplace where you can choose insurance and, you get all kinds of prices and options. But you don't have the option of choosing the bare bones plan that you feel you should have the freedom to choose. And I don't think that type of freedom is significant.
Does the gentleman wish further time? No. Then the gentleman is excused. The gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was just going to say to the gentlelady from North Carolina, I was kind of hoping that she was going to retract her earlier comments, because I think where the ranking member took offense was I think she thought, and I think we thought, that her comments were pretty disparaging about those of us on this committee. And similarly, I would say to the gentlelady that she totally took Mr. Pallone's comments out of context and turned it into something that he did not say or mean. And I would just caution, and I guess for all of us, on both sides, we've got to be very careful what we say up here. We debate things, in a very heated fashion all the time, but when it gets very personal, I think it detracts from our ability to to do our jobs. And I just I think we've all been guilty of saying things that sometimes cross the line, but I would have preferred that the gentlelady had said, I retract those comments. I think that would have been more appropriate. And again, I want to make sure that Mr. Pallone had an opportunity to respond, and I think he did. The notion that somehow he doesn't value our freedom or believe in our freedom, that's just not the case in any way, shape, or form. And I thank the gentleman for being here. I thank the chairman for yielding the time.
I thank the gentleman. There are all sorts of words that are spoken regularly. Some are the words that you can see the word elitism, and some are freedom. And we've had both of them expressed here today.
Mr. Chairman.
A gentleman from Florida seek recognition.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman. I echo the
Gentleman's
sentiments
recognized.
of Mr. McGovern, and I spoke in Dr. Fox's absence with reference to my feelings, with reference to the use of the term credibility, and my interpretation was that it was meant to address character and not competence. And if it was meant to address character, then I took umbrage and do. And that's all I wanted to say. I don't know about all of the articles, how they are construing credibility. There are probably 6 or 7 connotations that one could look at, but the 2 that stick out in my mind are the ones that I just mentioned. And if anybody questions any of our character, it's almost beyond the pale. And to the statement that you made just then, my colleague from North Carolina, with regard to our side and freedom, I don't believe that there's a single member of Congress that does not recognize how precious freedom is. And I certainly do. And just to make it clear, I don't think you love America any more than anybody else in this room.
Gentleman yields back his time. I thank the gentleman. I believe this committee knows that I value every single person's words, feedback, and the spirit in which they say that. And Mr. Pallone, we want to thank you for taking time to be with us today, and I hope you felt most welcome and respected by you taking time to be here today. I don't think there's an accusation to the regard, but I think it's important that we all know that both of our witnesses today did have an opportunity to objectively present their views. At this time, I would I will first of all close the hearing on H.R. 3350 and wish to thank the committee members and the staff for their personal assistance in this matter, and the Chairman will be in receipt of a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 3350, the Keep Your Health Plan Act of 2013, a closed rule. The rule provides 1-hour debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. Finally, the rule provides 1 motion to recommit.
You have now heard the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Is there discussion or amendment? Gentleman from Worcester, Massachusetts is recognized.
We'll get you to pronounce that right one day.
Worcester. Worcester. I'm trying my best.
All right.
Say it one more time, Jim.
Worcester.
Worcester.
All right, close.
Right.
So, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 3350 an open rule so that all members may have an opportunity to offer amendments to this to the bill on the House floor. And if I just have a minute, Mr. Chairman, I There have been amendments that have been submitted from members that want to have their say on this. As I mentioned before, this bill did not go through regular order. This was not considered by the committees of jurisdiction. There were no amendments offered in any of the committees of jurisdiction, and the amendments that are being offered up here today we're being told that they're not allowed. You can call this an emergency if you want. The President fixed this issue this morning, so it seemed to me that you could wait at least a day and go through the motions and have a committee markup if you want to give a closed rule. But barring the fact that you're not going to allow committees of jurisdiction to mark it up, I would hope that we would be able to have an open rule so that members can offer amendments on the House floor. Again, there have been 0 hearings on this bill. There have been 0 markups on this bill. You know, health care is an important issue. I think it deserves better consideration than this. And I would just finally say that a long and a very long hearing in the Rules Committee is not a substitute for the committees of jurisdiction doing their work. If that's going to be the new norm, then we might as well abolish all the other committees, and we're it. So with that, I hope my members will support my amendment.
You've heard the discussion and the amendment that's been made by the gentleman from Massachusetts. Is there any discussion? I would offer the discussion that I believe that the President of the United States moved to his action because the House of Representatives announced that we were going to do something about this today. And I believe that the U.S. House of Representatives are leaders in the United States of America, and we effectively heard from the American people. And I believe that our bill, our ideas, going through legislative process, including a simple 2-page bill, can be well understood by the American people. Thus, I would support a no vote. Those in favor of the McGovern amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. No. Noes have it. Noes have it. Further
I'm not
discussion?
going to call for a roll call vote because I know how it's going to turn out.
Further amendment or discussion? Seeing none, the vote is now on the motion by the gentlewoman from Grandfather Village, North Carolina. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those no?
No!
The ayes have it. The ayes have it. And we now will have the gentleman who gave a stellar performance today, the gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Burgess, who will be representing the Republican Party.
And I will represent the Democratic Party.
And the gentleman from Massachusetts will be representing the Democratic Party. I had not earlier had an opportunity to introduce three friends who are visiting Washington, D.C. One of them, the gentleman from Dallas, Texas, Dr. John T. Gill. Dr. Gill, thank you for being here this evening. I also recognize that Dr. Marcy Zwelling from Los Angeles, California, was in attendance as my guest. And my college president, Dr. Ed Berger from Southwestern University in Georgetown, Texas, is here and waiting in my office. And so I'm delighted that he had a chance to see one of his graduates to take part in this discussion today. And I want to thank all the members of the committee for not only for their attendance, but also for the brilliant work that was performed on both sides. Seeing nothing further from the committee, we are now completed our work for the day.